week into the new material from this week. We're going to move on to paragraph 2 and probably 3. I'm just guessing, but we'll start with 2. So welcome everybody. It is week 141, woot, of the Millennia and Microcosm Kenneth Smith seminar. We're working our way through his book Millennia and Microcosm, which is going to be published by David and I, collecting together all of the columns that he wrote back in the 1998 to 2000 time frame in a column called End Times at the end of a magazine called the Comics Journal. And he took the opportunity of the turnover of the millennium to raise the question of how do different epochs of history see the world differently from each other? What are the different worldviews that correspond to the different epochs? And if we can learn enough about other worldviews, then maybe it gives us a chance to perceive how our own worldview is also a limiting framing device that keeps us from seeing the world the way it is. Maybe we can learn to see the world and ourselves in new and interesting ways once we break through from the parochialism that moderns are born with, of thinking that moderns see the world exactly the way it is because we're the most scientificalist and the technologicalist and the objectivist and rationalist, and really nobody could be as cool as we are. So this book is there to drive a stake into that into that ideology and help us see different worldviews. We're just starting chapter 6. Last week we began chapter 6. Chapters from 5 on, we're doing chapters that investigate the medieval worldview and the medieval epoch. So chapter 5 introduced really what we might think of as the dogmatic side of the medieval worldview. What did the powers that be want people to think? And by want, we mean insist on, with stakes and bonfires and the cross or the sword and all that kind of religious genocidal impulse that was part of the heart of the medieval epoch. The idea that the problem with the ancient world, it must have been diversity. Too many people have too many ideas. We must get rid of all of the wrong ideas, and the right idea just coincidentally happens to be ours. And once everybody thinks the way we think, then we'll have a world of goodness and peace and beauty and kindness. In chapter 6, we're looking at the other half of the heart of the medieval epoch, because it's a dialectic at its heart. It's not a thing. It's a conflict that rages for 1,000 years. And the other half of the dialectic is the opposite. It's based on the idea of the brotherhood of man and humility, and that we are not gods. We don't see the world the way God does. We don't entirely understand who God is or what he wants for us and wants us to do. And so we have to approach issues of religion from a standpoint of curiosity and interest and learning, and not just dogmatically stamping out whatever we happen to already believe. And he kicks off this chapter with a series of quotes from William Blake, which is a great place to start. William Blake is although he's post-medieval, he's really a nice example of the mystical tradition. He says out loud in the modern era a lot of things that mystics during the medieval era would not have been safe for them to say. So they often said so only privately or among their friends or in their little monastic cloisters, and not at large. So we went through a bunch of these quotes last week, and I've just got them there for reference, and I've got the link to chapter 6. But I'm mainly going to skim past them. Other than what we didn't really cover last week much is paragraph 1, sentence 2.6, if we're counting that last quote as part of that. And this is part of William Blake's Marginalia, where he's talking about prophets and saying that prophets are not people who see the future. They're people who are human beings, and they just do their best to say, if we keep on going like this, then that will be the result of what we do. They're not. He's demystifying the concept of a prophet and saying the prophet's purpose is to share wisdom, not to pretend to have psychic powers or divine powers that allows him to speak absolute truths about the universe. Because William Blake doesn't believe that people can do that. And yet he believes there's an important role for the prophet, that you want people who can see farther to share their warnings about what they're seeing coming. As he says, thus, if you go on so, the result is so. He never says such a thing shall happen, let you do what you will. Prophet is a seer, not an arbitrary dictator. It is man's fault if God is not able to do him good, for he gives to the just and to the unjust, but the unjust reject his gift. So this is an interest, it's a nuanced take on the relationship between God and man. This is William Blake in a nutshell, and it's the mystical tradition in a nutshell throughout the medieval epoch. And I'll call on Ari in just a second, but the critical element here is this idea of a dialectic, that it is all too easy for us to caricature the medieval epoch and say it's all one thing or it's all the other thing. But the truth is this ancient truth, the polyntropy, the dialectic. The truth is that both halves of the heart of the medieval epoch are equally important, that there is this mystical tradition of questioning and investigating and being a lifelong student and treating religion as something that's not supposed to close down your mind. It's supposed to dilate your mind and make you consider possibilities you never considered before. That the sacred is beyond us. The sacred isn't what I, a human being, can dictate to you. By definition, that's merely human. The sacred is what transcends the human and requires us to investigate, to learn, to explore, to read, to engage in a dialogue with other thinkers and other mystics, and to really spend our whole lives, traveling these inadequately explored possibilities of the cosmos. And that half of the tradition is every bit as important as the swords and crosses and do what I say or I'll burn you at a stake tradition. Neither of them, despite their best efforts, neither of them gets to define the medieval epoch and say, I'm the medieval epoch and the other thing is an exception. Neither of them is an exception, even though they both try to treat each other as exceptions. This dialectic is the whole point. So Ari, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I wanted to make a quick point as a hopefully just a modification, but it could be seen as a rejection of this idea of prophecy, and it's based in an essay by again Jonathan Sacks that reflects the Jewish tradition. That the essay is titled "Prophecy and Prediction." If a prophecy comes true, it has failed, and if a prediction comes true, it is successful. And that a prophecy is always, when pointing out, like basically what this is saying, an honest man or someone who I would argue has sophrosyne can see you're a bunch of lemmings that are about to go over a cliff. If you keep going on, you're going to go over the cliff. And the whole point of his telling this, the prophet is trying to warn them, don't be lemmings to go over the cliff. So if he gets them to change their behavior, like Jonah did, then he's successful. And so the idea is the ancient prophet, where it says the prophecy of Nineveh failed, is exactly wrong. The prophecy was successful because it got Nineveh to change its behavior. And prophecy is always this. Prophecy is always like, there's doom and gloom on the horizon. If we don't change our ways, that doom and gloom will come true. But if we change our ways, then the doom and gloom will not come true, right? And so this is where this really makes sense as a wise person trying to impart wisdom, or essentially someone who has sophrosyne, trying to see they're outside of the herd. I'm imagining the lemmings just marching, and the lemming is outside enough to get enough distance to be like, there's a cliff over there, guys. Don't stop it. Don't go over the cliff, right? If you can get them to change their path, and right. So this is where I would. It's not quite a rejection of what they're saying. It's almost exactly what it's saying, but it's returning this idea that the prediction has failed, but a prophecy is always a warning. And if you get someone to change their behavior, then the prophecy did its job, which is by not coming true.
That's an incredibly useful piece, Ari. Thank you for adding that. And I think you're right that it takes the spirit of what William Blake is saying and really gives it more richness by making the distinction between prophecy and prediction. And I think in doing so, it helps to illuminate the point that he's trying to make better than he himself did. So thank you for that. I put a link there to the Jonathan Sacks essay for those who want to follow up on what Ari's talking about here. But I think that's right on. And whether we take it in the William Blake way or in the Ari/Jonathan Sacks way, I think in both cases what we're seeing is an attempt to really humanize and thereby more deeply understand, this religious role. What is its purpose? Is it just to push a button and get the goods, or is it to help us to grow up and think better and to share the gifts of the Spirit more widely? It's interesting stuff, and you can see why these kinds of approaches would be very important to and popular among the mystics of the medieval epoch. Very welcome. Whereas they'd be very unwelcome among the divine right kings and popes and clergy who are like, shut up and do what we say. We don't want you. We will explore what God wants and we'll share it with you. We don't want you exploring it. So this is where that tug of war happens again in the medieval epoch between is it a brotherhood of man and we're all in the same boat and we're trying to explore these issues together, or are we creating a class society with a hierarchy in which you don't have to your pretty little heads because we'll do that for you, and by the way, give us all your gold. There's this this way in which the pushback against the corruption of the Roman Empire, which was the original motivating force of the medieval revolution, it, it created a succeeding society in which part of the society was committed to that revolutionary ideal of the brotherhood of man and the elimination of corruption. And the other part of society branded itself as being against that corruption, while secretly behind closed doors actually embodying that corruption, saying we have acquired the reins of empire from the old pagan empire, and now we don't want to put them down because it's nice to be in charge of everything. We have all this power and money, and this is fabulous. But the whole basis of our taking over was to pretend to be humble and to be kind and loving and have a brotherhood of man. So now we're going to create a class whose specialty is pretending to be one thing while actually being something else. This distinction between character, the inner truth of the person, their nature, versus the persona or the brand that's being projected outwards. It's the wolf in sheep's clothing, if you will. So this split, this class division, this is why Kenneth Smith says the great discovery of the medieval epoch is of the refinement of the Benausos. What are the Benausoi really? Because the ancient Greeks were confused on this question, and their confusion helped to lead to the downfall and decay of the ancient epoch. The medieval epoch is an epoch in which the Benausoi separated themselves from everybody else while learning to pretend to be everybody else so that they wouldn't get that pushback that they used to get in the ancient world. And that sets us up for the modern epoch in which they can take off the mask and just say, we're in charge, shut up. So Phil, you got your hand up. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I have a question. To what degree is this dialectic a bias laid by Neoplatonism? Because it seems to me like seeing into the future, seeing all that kind of stuff is what the prophecies are, and in fact, what I suppose people experience in general. But it seems to me God didn't reveal his secret through vision. He never appeared. It seems like he spoke to you. Isn't that talking or speaking? I mean, like, why are we prejudiced on seeing as the information when talking, the verbal sound is really the true essence of the prophecies? I mean, like, I I think that has to do with the fact that Plato himself put seeing first, even though he contradicted himself because, like, for instance, that picture representation, I guess is maybe he could say that's not true seeing because that's just an illusion, but seeing, and of course the Renaissance picked that up, and when they did the Renaissance perspective, putting an emphasis on realism as seeing. So to what degree that seeing has biased the whole Western tradition and actually is not part of the mystical tradition at all, because hearing is the fundamental truth uh, from the divine, supposedly, you know. So could you say something about that? Because that seems like a pretty interesting dialectic on its own. I mean, Plato also contradicted himself that, you know, he emphasized when you're teaching children, you should teach them how to sing. I mean, I don't know if he emphasized you should teach them how to paint. You know what I mean? So that's kind of interesting. Could you say something about that? Because it seemed like a very, very interesting transformation that, in a sense, retained a kind of bias of the classical age.
Yeah. Certainly, Plato distinguishes, in fact, Greek culture in general distinguishes between um, harmony and music on the one hand as being a high art and really necessary to mathematics and to philosophy from their perspective, versus the pictorial arts. And people who did sculptures or paintings were considered mere craftsmen. It was considered just a step up above bricklayers, but basically in the same group. This is there's a certain amount of training that's required. There's a certain amount of pursuit of excellence that's involved, but ultimately it doesn't cause you to transform your understanding of the world. Whereas they felt that the studies of the intervals in harmony was it would open your mind to the possibilities of mathematical understanding. This becomes especially important in Plato after he has his period with the Pythagoreans and comes the second period of Plato. But as far as the medieval world, it's hard to generalize. Um, the medieval world, for one thing, you've got a split between the Eastern and Western Roman empires, post Roman empires, right? You've got on the one hand, in the West, you have the ultra rationalist Roman Catholic Church, um, but in the East, you've got the Greek Orthodox Church dominating, and the Greek Orthodox Church believes more in immersive experiences as being an essential component of religion. It's not enough to be rational. If you're only rational, then from the Eastern Orthodox position, that's a sub-religious position. You need the transformative experience, and that's part of why you get this these differences in the uses of icons, for example. Hi, Sharon. Welcome to the call. Uh, so the other thing is, even in the Western Church, you see changes over time in their appreciation of the importance of depiction, like stained glass and the architecture of the Gothic architecture leading the eye upwards towards heaven on the one hand, and then on the other hand, the choirs, the Gregorian chants, the music. So I think it's too hard to generalize. And I haven't even talked about Jewish medievalism and Muslim medievalism, Chinese medievalism. I think it's too varied. Um, I think it's too varied to generalize. There's a lot of diversity on this. I mean, you're raising interesting stuff, and we can make sure that we come back to it as we talk about specific mystics or religious or political leaders who take specific positions on it. Because a lot of people have opinions about it, but their opinions are different from each other.
Well, I'll say one more thing. It seems interesting that Byzantine art, well, particularly, I guess, Russian art, which is the remnants of the Byzantine art,
Yeah.
has a kind of a reverse perspective. In other words, in the West perspective, you look and converge into the thing to create a representation. But in Byzantine art, particularly the Russians, they have this thing where the paintings are put in the corner. And the concept there is that instead of looking in a rational way in a construction, it's reversed. God opened the perspective to you in some sense. So in some sense, that relationship is God is spilling out
Mm-hmm.
the information. And so therefore, when you put it in the corner, what happens is in fact, actually at the ceiling, at the corner of the three joints, it actually opens up all the whole space rather than closing it down. So
Right.
that's a very interesting aspect of how you would say, well, these guys don't have perspective correct. They didn't want it correct.
That's right. That's right. But that's like criticizing a fish for not climbing trees well. It's like, no, no, they're doing something different. There's a reason that they're not optimizing for the thing that we think they should optimize for.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
That's an important little detail that I had because I was talking to somebody about Malevich, Malevich, who's a suprematist rather than a constructivist. His stuff looks very much like constructivism, in some sense.
yes.
But his black square, which is a very, very important thing, when he displayed it, he threw up in the corner where the ceiling and the walls meet, so that it would have that open. That's why there's something that's sort of like mystical about it. It's suprematism rather constructivism, rather than man-made is talking to the supreme being that opens up the space of the world.
Could you put a link in the chat to that artist?
Yeah, Malevich.
Yeah, please. Just as time permits.
Well,
Or
I have to find it.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
Well, I used to have, a lecture in which I could, but somehow by moving,
Yeah,
that file is not so much disappeared, but I don't know where it is. So
yeah.
it's
Just,
hard to.
when you can, put it drop
Okay.
a link in and we can follow up. Donald, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Oh, Phil keeps punching my button there. It's got to say Plato, Plato, Plato. It's like a dog whistle or something.
Oh,
But,
don't act
but
like don't act like Pavlov, man. I'm not Pavlov.
I wouldn't really disagree with what you said. But it does seem to me that visual, I mean, actually Plato uses to see the orine many times. Don't you see what's happening here? Don't you know? And geometry, something that one needs to see the proofs, see the constructions, is the way we begin the ascent of the divided line. So I think you're pretty correct, at least in some understanding. Plato does place a priority or a premium or whatever on the visual, because it's that's how you get started on the road to philosophy. If you can't do math, you can't do philosophy. You can't do geometry. You can't do, at least on Plato's scheme of things. But I also think from Plato's view that, like music, I'm not sure he bans all music from the Republic or anything like that, but he's certainly aware that maybe music is dangerous to the soul in a way seeing isn't. I mean, all you have to do is go to some bar with a live band or a rave or something, and you can see what music can do to people today. You don't have to go back to Athens to see that people can get consumed or into music in a way they don't get into geometry. They don't.
Could I disagree with you?
How
Could I agree and disagree with you a bit? I mean, certainly, you stop when you go to the divider line and it becomes geometry and seeing and all that. But it seems to me there seems to be a conflict between Socrates and Plato in that sense. Socrates always wanted to speak and find the truth from speaking, and in some sense, that's why he was against writing, because that consolidates speaking into almost a formula, not quite a formula, but sort of construction. So I think that there might be disagreement. I think that's why I think Plato stepped over, in a way, Socrates to a certain degree. Although he certainly used him as a, as a mouthpiece for his own work.
Yeah. Uh, I don't know. I really don't know what I think. I think Socrates always spoke.
Yeah.
But I think Socrates was aware of the danger of spoken philosophy.
That's true.
You know, that, so I don't think we disagree in the sense that, look, somewhere in Valhalla or someplace, there are all these philosophers from history are sitting in their rocking chairs on the front porch, and do they have anything to talk about because they all agree? Or do they continue the conversations that have consumed men for the entire history of men? I tend to think they have a lot to talk about. That in the end, not a lot got settled. But I'll come. Certainly, Socrates. To me, it's developing philosophical living, and even if you read Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, there's all this sort of knowing, but the knowing is to get you on the road to living. It's not an end in itself. And I don't know how to, or maybe I'm just talking about myself, Phil. I studied philosophy, and I came quickly that knowing the history of philosophy and the arguments, being able to correctly replicate the arguments of all the famous philosophers, really wasn't going to help me very much. But that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to try and figure out how to live differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I sense that in you. You, for all your art, for all your time, you have a way of living that is very thoughtful and concerned about what is best for you and others. And that's a hard place to get to, I think.
Well, I don't want to go on
let's
this
don't
discussion.
go right. But like you say, okay, Plato went far beyond the purely Platonic dialogues and stuff like that. I can hardly read them. I can read the Socratic ones when he's in the Meno, when he's drawing figures in the sand. I got that. When he's talking, and about the end of his life, when he's arguing with the sophist, his contemporary sophist, and some like those dialogues are very real to me. But I don't know where some of the more. I mean, I have some ideas, but I don't talk about them because I don't think they're worth talking about. But so I think there's a lot of agreement between us, Phil.
Well, you brought up something I want to talk about, but I'm going to wait till later.
Oh, well, here, I'll mute myself and you can.
No. I don't want you to mute yourself, believe me.
Well, if you're both going to step back, then I'm going to push a little Kenneth Smith on us.
Yeah.
Why don't we go on to paragraph 2? So this is where he resumes writing after the William Blake quotes, and he says that Jesus is the Son of God is disputable, and then his parenthetical is, there is an entire gospel, Mark, in which he, Jesus, makes no claim to be the Messiah and forbids his disciples to call him such.
Oh,
We'll come back to the rest of this sentence in a moment, but I want to pause here and say, before the canon was formed, when these gospels and epistles and acts and apocalypses were originally written, including all the ones that weren't included, they didn't have an order. They were a bunch of separate works. There was no sequence. And it was part of the process of canonizing in which they decided on a sequence. And it's particularly interesting that the sequence they did not decide on is chronological order. Because you'd think the earliest works potentially are the closest in witness to the life of Jesus. They might be the truest stuff. And the later works might have more interpolation, extrapolation, wishful thinking, and so on. So you'd think you'd want to put the early stuff first, but no, that is exactly the opposite of what the canonizers did. They said that we don't want you reading Paul at all until after you've read the Gospels. And among the Gospels, we don't want you reading the earliest Gospel until you've read the later ones that have more interpretation. We'll let you have Mark later, but let's get you some Matthew and some Luke first. And once you have soaked in those perspectives on Jesus, then we know that when you read Mark, you'll fill in the blanks that Mark leaves. All kinds of things Mark doesn't talk about. Your mind will fill them in with Matthew and Luke, and you will assume that you're reading, another view of the same life and the same situation. But if that's not what you do, if you instead set aside everything you learned from Matthew and Mark and John, just completely take them out, put them on a shelf, stick a pin in them, and read Mark fresh as the first. Imagine it's the only gospel, because for a while it was. So if you read Mark that way, you realize that it is a completely alien perspective on Jesus compared to the others. He is not, for one thing, he's not a sweet, kind, loving guy. He may have a heart full of love, but man, does he insults his disciples repeatedly. He has withering scorn for them. He's constantly yelling at people, especially the ones close to him. And a whole bunch of the John, I am the light and the truth and the way, and nobody reaches the Father except through me, is like completely missing from Mark. Mark doesn't do I, me, and Mark doesn't do I'm supernatural and I'm the Messiah and you all have to follow him. Mark is very, then Jesus went here and did this thing, and then Mark yelled at, and then Jesus yelled at a fig tree, and then Jesus's disciples said, "Oh, will you do a miracle for us?" And then Jesus chewed them out and left his disciples behind and went to go talk to a leper. I mean, there's Jesus's relationship to his disciples and to the whole theology that we associate with Christianity is completely alien in Mark, and it's why most Christians would be shocked about the idea that in Mark, Jesus doesn't make a claim to be the Messiah and forbids his disciples from calling him that, because they don't know. Because by the time they read Mark, they've already read the other Gospels. And so they just insert unconsciously between the lines in Mark all the things they expect to find there based on what they did find in Matthew and Luke and John. It's very interesting. And it's even more interesting if you do that same game with Paul. If you start with Paul, if you start by stripping away the letters that most people think aren't authentic, and you just zero in on the central Pauline epistles, and if you read those without thinking about the Gospels or Acts or Revelations at all, just put all that stuff aside and read Paul and say, what does Paul have to say about Jesus? It's weird. I mean, it's even weirder than Mark. It's so different from what we normally think. But for this reason, when they were constructing the canon, they stuck Paul after the Gospels, so that by the time you get to Paul, your mind is full of all of the things that you learned from the Gospels, and then you read all that into the way that you interpret Paul. Mm-hmm. Even though Paul, in many cases, directly contradicts the Gospels, but you sort of harmonize it and reconcile it because you know what Paul meant. Paul obviously meant what Luke said and Matthew said and all the other stuff that you've already filled your mind full of. It is a very clever construction. And there's a number of books you can find out there that talk about that construction and why it's been organized that way. But the result is that most of us who've spent a lifetime reading these books still don't know them as well as we think we do, because we have been guided through a process of harmonization and um, kind of making a palimpsest, writing over the actual text of Mark and Paul with the things that they don't actually say, but other people said. It's striking. I mean, I've talked before about, for example, the way we know that the ending of Mark is not authentic. We found the oldest copies of Mark, and the oldest copies of Mark don't include the final paragraph. The final paragraphs where he goes out and he tells his, he shows himself to his disciples so that they can start the ministry of the resurrection of Jesus. None of that's in Mark. Mark ends with, and the women came to the tomb and they found that it was empty, and they went away and they didn't tell anybody. The end. That's the end of Mark. It's a shocking ending. It's like, well, if they didn't tell anybody, how do we know this? It's the obvious question we come away with. And clearly some medieval scribe at some early point said, I hate this ending. This doesn't make sense. They must have told somebody. And so, he just wrote a marginal note saying, well, then, surely at some point they changed their mind and they went and told the disciples, or maybe Jesus appeared to the disciples. But at any rate, and then some later copier did what we know happened over and over for the few centuries, which is they, while copying the text, they copied the marginalia right into the text. And so what was somebody's annotation or commentary going, what the hell? Has turned into the new ending of Mark that Mark never wrote. So the books are really interesting to read if you can peel apart this stuff. And so what Kenneth is saying is shocking to us, mainly because we always approach these books the same way, in the same order, with the same priority, and with the same layers of interpretation laid on top of them. It's if you peel that back that you say, well, yeah, maybe Mark doesn't agree that Jesus is the Son of God. Maybe that was an idea that was added in later Gospels. And what does that mean? Well, what the point that Kenneth's trying to make here, and he's trying to build off of William Blake in this, is that when we talk about there being a dialectic between the official hierarchy and the dogma that it wants to stamp out, the cross or the sword, convert or die, on the one hand, and on the other hand, this mystical brotherhood of man tradition that's about dilating the soul, asking questions, exploring the possibilities of faith, they have completely different takes on this. Jesus as the Son of God is indispensable to the authoritarian genocidal approach to religion. Do what I say or else. Because Jesus is your only hope not to be tortured for all eternity. So, you better accept him as your savior or else. That fits really well with the Charlemagne approach. I'm gonna convert Europe by force. I'm gonna burn the sacred groves. I'm gonna steal all the gold that's been accumulated for thousands of years in these groves all over Europe. I'm gonna make the church rich. They're gonna crown me emperor. I'm gonna gain all this worldly power. This is what religion is, right? This is the centralist, the dogmatist approach. And for that, Jesus needs to be the Son of God. It has to be indisputable. But for the sacred traditions, the mystical traditions, the monastic traditions, the Jewish traditions, and many of the Islamic mystical traditions, there's no need. It doesn't matter whether Jesus is the Son of God or not. That's irrelevant. The important part is, what did Jesus have to say? Not Jesus as a magic get out of hell token that we have access to, and if you want it, you have to submit to us, but rather Jesus as a teacher, as a moral genius, as a revolutionary, as someone who is trying to embody and reframe the works of Rabbi Hillel, for example. This idea that you can engage creatively and intellectually and ethically with the things that Jesus says, and that it doesn't matter whether or not he's Son of God. That's irrelevant. This is very important to this other half of the medieval dialectic. And as he asserts, he says, I'll just finish out the paragraph. He says, but what is beyond dispute is that Jesus was a moral genius, a revolutionary in values. Even today, the values he laid down keep roiling in spite of everything the organized church can do to pave them over. And so to this day, one of the most common things that you'll hear in religious communities is There are those for whom the church is very important, and being part of the church and in good standing is the most important part. And there are those who don't want to be a part of organized religion because they feel that organized religion betrays the central message of the revolutionary founders of these religions, whether it's Buddhists who don't want to join a Buddhist church because they're more interested in what Buddha said than they are in the hierarchy that developed later, whether they're, Islamic mystics, whether they're Jewish mystics, whether there's always these people who say, I'm spiritual, not religious, by which they mean I don't trust the centralized hierarchical authority because I think that it has a conflict of interest and is focusing on maintaining its power. But I'm very interested in the revolutionary message of ethics and thinking about, how should we treat one another and so on. So all of this is what he's alluding to. And you can, if you study medieval Islam, medieval Judaism, you study medieval Christianity, you study medieval China and the various religions there, in medieval Japan and their religions, you will see this exact same dialectic. Are we meant to engage creatively with the message and to think about the world, or are we meant to obey and submit? That's the big defining tug of war of the medieval epoch. Phil, tell us what's on your mind.
It's very, very interesting what you exposed, because I have two thoughts. One was when you first said that they're not sure whether, in fact, Jesus himself claimed that I'm not God. That reminded me of Buddha on his deathbed telling his disciples, please don't turn me into a God. Of course, they immediately did. I mean, there seems to be some urgency to create this sort of I guess eternal figure that dominates everything. So that really, that parallelism struck me, and it seemed to me, wow, same thing happened to Buddha, same thing happened to Jesus. What was the other thing I want to talk about? God dang, I want to talk about one thing. I forgot the other one now.
It'll come back to you.
Yeah, okay.
It'll come back to you. It's the advantage of our not rushing through this text. We have opportunities to remember the things that we've forgotten and bring them back in. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, I think this whole thing about the Messiah has gone in the wrong direction. You remember that the Messiah at the time of Jesus, in the world he lived in, was the one that was destined to be king of the Jews and free them from foreign oppression so they can live their virtuous lives. There's never anything about Son of God. That was a later thing that came in. Now, we go Monty Python here. Only the true Messiah would deny he's the Messiah. But now, if we go with Mark, he might have been saying, well, no, I'm not the Messiah. I'm doing something else. Or don't go around calling me the Messiah, because they do nasty things to messiahs these days. The Sanderheen aren't too keen. The Romans definitely come down on messiahs, big time. So if you went around broadcasting widely, hey, dude, I'm the Messiah, trouble is approaching. Now, just remember, Messiah does not mean God back in its origins. Another point, of course, this particular page, bringing up William Blake, that it's brought up the 18th century. It's a bit curious, because we've gone through the ancient Greek perspective. We're dealing with the medieval epoch, and for some reason he's brought up Blake, and we have the 18th century romantic. The curious thing to remember is that in the 18th century, the bean counters had taken over. With Newton, with his view of the world, that the world is just a vast, predictable mechanism, that had caused a revolution in opinion within a few decades. We were living in an increasingly dry world. If you go back to the court of Queen Elizabeth, you're only going to mostly get anywhere in her favour if you're a good poet. The height of technology at the time was the wooden man of war. Originally, they used to cover these ships in artwork. It just says something about their perspective. Okay, we're building this man of war. Let's make sure we have artwork from stem to stern. Now, in the 18th century, or in the British Navy around about 1720, that created a furor, and they said, well, okay, we'll let you have a little bit of artwork up the front and up the back, but this is just expensive nonsense. So what we're seeing, when we see Romanticism in the 18th century, we're seeing a revival Romanticism against the cold world of the bean counter. We go back before the 18th century into the early 17th century, 16th century. This is a world full of Romanticism. And another thing in the 18th century, that what preceded the Romantics proper was what's called the Awakening, where various people, well, in the Protestant world, felt that the state church was simply the same authoritarianism that the Catholic Church had been. Well, you know, they point out Blake was strongly influenced by Swedenborg, a sort of religious romantic. Sweden passed a law in the 18th century that forbade any religious assembly outside the church beyond your family. In other words, you couldn't gather a group of people together and engage in a sort of or an almost religious assembly. And Swedenborg was horrified by this, absolutely horrified. To him, the freedom for a group of people to profess their belief in God was sacred. So this is, you know, there are all these sort of quandaries in the 18th century. And of course, he sort of brought it up on this particular page. I don't know where we'll come back to it again, because I haven't really looked at all this stuff again. But the Messiah was not a god. The Messiah was the man appointed to lead the Jews in this world. And this is another aspect, all this sort of Christianity, all this mysticism about the crucifixion. Well, for the Messiah, it made plain sense. The Romans kill the Messiah. Therefore, the Messiah obtains victory over the Romans by rising from the dead. The Romans have failed. Of course, later on, we see everything's changed. They turn Jesus into God, because only a God has the magic power to save you. This seemed to be the quandary for the later Christians. So they're trying to create a package that was going to answer all the questions. You know, when people go and put their hand up, but, oh, okay, Jesus is this King of the Jews. What's that got to do with me? So there are all these questions. So yeah, this idea that we have later, that Jesus is a God. This is some sort of Hermetic tradition or something like that, or pagan tradition. It's not a Hebrew tradition. Anyway, sorry I rambled on for so long. Thank you very much.
It's fine, Stephen. Thank you. I mean, it really underscores again the danger of using the phrase Judeo-Christian, because it sort of lumps in Judaism and Christianity as though they think the same things and have the same general opinions, and they really don't. I mean, especially as you point out on this issue of what is the Messiah, and to the later Christians, the Messiah becomes God, basically. He's called the Son of God, but he's the part of God that you want to talk to rather than God the Father. Everything becomes this tangled attempt to reconcile um, otherwise irreconcilable parts of the theology to try to keep it monotheistic while having a lot of different components. And by the time they're done doing those changes, it's unrecognizable as the original Judaism from which it arose. But wants to claim that it's the real Judaism, and so we start getting this Judeo-Christian term, as though it's one thing. It's why I've likewise gradually come out against Greco-Roman. Is the Romans would love us to think that they are embodying all the important parts of ancient Greece, as opposed to Greece merely being their brand, and that they're in many ways the ultimate corruption of ancient Greece, the betrayal of the Greek value system and worldview, but wearing the Greek mask on its face, saying, I'm trust me, I'm totally into, the best and the brightest should rise to the top. And by best and the brightest, I mean, inbred psychopathic, greed monsters. But let us not say that publicly. Let's just put that Greek mask on our face. So, I mean, Ari's going to have very interesting things to say on this question of the Messiah, I'm sure. But I think in general, our premise here is it would not be surprising that the earliest Christian gospel is the one that doesn't talk about Jesus being the Son of God, doesn't talk about Jesus being the Messiah. It's just not focused on any of that stuff. It's a completely different, it's a different focus and a different text. Anyway, thank you, Stephen. Phil, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I remember what I wanted to say, the second part, which is kind of important. It seems to me like I'm going to talk about it in a way of like revisionism, because it's exactly what it did. And revisionism is almost some way of struggling for a kind of structure to power of some sort. And it seems to me like I learned this when I came to this country. I was young, and I because I didn't speak English, they put me in reading development and all that. And I learned that the way to read a book or anything is you read the first paragraph and you find a topic sentence, because they'll say, this is what this is about. Okay. Then you skip through the rest of the text. You go to the end and says, therefore, as you could see, is this way. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange, because like the end is at the beginning in some sense, right? In other words, they construct a beginning. As a matter of fact, that has become a kind of habit, a structure that we think in terms of like reading in general. Now, maybe not some radical writing of some sort, but you tell them a story and you tell them what you told them was the story, which is the middle part. And then you said, aha, therefore, you see, I just am concluding this is what I told you. So it's kind of interesting, when I was reading Kierkegaard, that he had a lot of stuff about prefaces, what the prefaces were. And it seemed to me the preface is almost always the conclusion, the summing up at the beginning. Should not be a postscript. I mean, really. I mean, why is the preface at the beginning so you are already indoctrinated before you even read it? Because that's the author's conclusion. This is what you should pay attention to, rather than let it unfold on its own, your own interpretation, because you've already been indoctrinated into this is the way it's going to be. I'm going to give you the postscript and call it a preface, just to prepare you to understand
Yeah,
what
yeah,
the hell I'm talking about.
yeah.
So that's interesting, and that's why I almost seem to like aphorisms because it's not connected in that way, you know? You just have these little spots and you have to make the connections yourself. So that's why I want to say it just seems like, yeah, that is so fully embedded in our reading culture that I'm sure some people object to that, but most people are just like, yeah. In fact, it's in television programs, you know? They're going to tell you what they're going to tell you, you know. Today it's about the economic downfall or whatever. And then they give you the details, and
Yes.
therefore you're screwed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, like it's very interesting. You've been indoctrinated in order to understand what you understand. That's it. That's a very important idea. And in fact, I'm beginning to think about hermeneutics. I'm not sure if that's what hermeneutics is. Hermeneutics is unfolding the things normally, but on the other hand, it could also be an indoctrination. I'll have to think about that more. That's it, Phil.
Thanks, Phil. Ari, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Hey, Al. Thanks. I'll come off on the video in just a moment. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, like, as you guessed, what the Jewish version of the what's it called?
The
The
Messiah.
Messiah is about. But I wanted to start with, again, it's more like I think a metaphor you used before about the dinosaur idea, that I am also just giving the modern interpretation of what the ancients were. So I'm not actually saying what the ancient Jews said. I have no idea what they really said, but I'm going to give the narration of what the modern Jewish people think the ancient Jewish people said. And um, generally, I like, as usual, I'm just in the school of Rabbi Sachs, we'll call it, because he the thing I love about him is he sources everybody, at least everybody that I know. He sources all over the place more than most, so it's great. But the idea is here that first of all, there's this idea of the messianic age is the literature that comes before a Messiah. So it would seem to be that the original idea of a Messiah is more like something between a golden age and a utopia. It's when society has figured out essentially sophro sune. It's basically when everybody is no longer just half developed like children, but really fully developed like adults that know how to have what the cheetah essentially has. I think it's really it's a fantasy, but it's really a setting a goal state for when humanity is behaving properly as a unified organism, that all of them together unify under whatever this means, recognizing the name of God. And it's strange that in Judaism, like everything a Jew or all of the blessings that you get, supposed to be protection from heaven, it's all for the sake of the name of God. Whatever, that's a huge discussion later of another time. But the important part is that's like in the messianic age, we're all unified because we understand the name of God, even though there's a gazillion names of God, and that first of all, it's more like a state of being as a society, as humanity. It's almost like, I think of like maybe a nice analogy is the very childish version of this is like in uh, fairy tales we have, and they live happily ever after. Happily ever after is this Messiah age of, and a lot of our stories have this, where like, the future is just perfect now. And then it comes to be that there's actually bring in the Messiah. There's like, and they're almost like a little confusing. One is a king, and I think he represents like the administrative aspect of humanity, that all of humanity is governed by one government, and it's a benevolent government. Maybe he's like a benevolent dictator or something like this, but he's like what we would often see in a lot of modern mythology. I'm thinking of like movies where there's like one superhero and he unifies everybody, and then he sort of like rules over everyone. I almost imagine like Superman is like this. He's not actually in charge of everybody, but because he's there, everybody knows, Superman will fix the day or something like this. It's very much of a fantastical idea, but in the simple sense, it's supposed to be from the fourth son of Jacob, which is Yehuda, and that's where Jews actually get their name Yehuda from. And he represents the messianic line of blood, like a blood thing, like that goes all the way to King David. And then David is somehow, when David gets into being the Jewish king that unites all the tribes, he somehow takes on the mantle of the literature, changes to being like, oh, and the Messiah will come from him, right? He's the best king that ever was. And so now it becomes linked to him. But it wasn't linked to him before that. He sort of, if you want to buy into the actual narrative or the mythology of the Judaism, somehow he earned the spot as, because he was such a great king, that he warranted his child, his offspring will bring the Messiah. But there's another Messiah who comes from Joseph, who goes down to Egypt, and this is more talked about as if he's maybe the herald. He's more just like as the prophet, but not a prophet who's giving prophecy of something that bad's going to happen. He's called something else, and I almost think this is what the Messiah does. Instead of saying the prophecy is bad like a prophet does, he's the Messiah saying something good that's going to happen. And so he heralds in the beginning of the Messianic age, but it's also very nebulous from like what writings we have, like what this actually means. The only thing that seems to be clear is that it comes from the line of Joseph, but like what he does exactly or whatnot, we only know he's different from the guy from David, because David comes to Jerusalem, and this guy somehow comes from like Hebron or something, another place of Israel. But the key point that I want to make here that's really interesting is I think the original form of the heralding of the Messianic times is done through either, like you would call a polyntropy, which or like a dialectic. If these are two coming together and they interact in a way, and they're not necessarily like the hero who causes the Messiah. They're more like, I think of a good analogy, instead of like a chemical reaction, they're not the chemicals that cause the reaction. They're the catalyst that just signifies that it's happening, right? They're more like on the sidelines signaling, hey, it's happening, and I'm taking a certain role telling you how this is happening. But they're not like the makers of the Messiah, the way we would think like Jesus, or at least the way I understand Jesus was like bringing it and making it happen and like causing all the things to happen, almost like Superman who has the superpowers. They're more like the cheerleader or something that's rooting for it, and then once you pay attention to the cheerleader, you know it's happening. It's like the cheerleader shows that the halftime is happening or something, right? So I think that's as far as I will speak about the Jewish version of the Messiah. That seems to be the case, and that seems to be the modern interpretation, that also when like the Jewish people, like, we want to bring about the Messianic age, whatever that means, like better times and an improvement of current conditions, and a sort of protest against accepting the injustices of the world, and you're going to live your life in a way that sort of is a partner in creation, where you're trying to help make things better. That once we've made things better enough, the Messianic age will like begin, almost like we brought enough momentum to doing good work in this world that it will bring about the Messianic age, which I kind of think, and I've heard some mysticism take about this as the origin for Judaism having a version of heaven. But our version of heaven is the Hebrew words called olam haba, which means the world to come, which could very literally mean the better future that we make for humanity once we've like figured our stuff out and figured out sofer sune. So heaven is very much like heaven on earth, that there's a future where people are living in a sofer sune sort of way. And then there's these guys that sort of either lead us in this process or signal us that this process is happening. And then it'll have a momentum on its own where the world to come will just be this Messianic age. Okay, I think that's enough Jewish ideas. Okay, good. That was fun. Thanks. I hope that was good.
That was helpful. Thank you, Ari. Yes. And that underscores this, that we shouldn't be surprised if when we read the gospel according to Mark, we see sort of a rejection of the later salvation-oriented Messiah. Or rather, it doesn't even need to be rejected, because maybe people haven't come up with it yet. They have a Messiah that's closer to what you're describing, in which this concept of Jesus as the Son of God. There's no place for that in the Jewish Messiah tradition you're talking about.
Well, I'd like to clarify that it seems to be purposely confusing. So like it could be a little bit like that, or it could be nothing like that. So it's like
Yes, yes. Yeah. And you know, another thing that we've seen, you know, I think chapter 5 has another quote from Mark that's relevant here, that's interesting, which is we're used to thinking of Christianity as an evangelical religion that's trying to get everybody to be Christian. But when you look at the quote from chapter 5 in Mark, he's talking about no, you don't tell people. The people who don't have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, don't talk to them about this religion. Don't talk to them about Christianity, and that has that idea of a non-proselytizing religion as an early form of Christianity is another thing that we it's really hard to reconcile with what the medieval church became. The medieval church became, not only is it proselytizing, it's proselytize or else. It's like you convert or die. It becomes under Charlemagne. So there's this huge transformation in the shape and direction of the religion over time. That's interesting. The non-proselytizing, you know, is one of those things that one thinks about Judaism right off the bat, where, you know, Judaism is the religion of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people don't say everybody in the world must convert to Judaism or else. You know, that's something we associate with Christianity. And again, that sort of breaks down the concept that the phrase Judeo-Christian again becomes problematic when it sort of seems to imply that they agree on the essentials, whereas this is a massive point of disagreement between the religions. So I find these things really interesting to get into, because it helps us to break up the little stereotypical caricatures and what I think of as thought terminating cliches that we grow up with, that tell us this equals that and that equals that, and things are either this or they're the other thing. We have all these what Kenneth Smith calls simplisms, which are gross oversimplifications of how to think about the world. And we're sort of been marinating in that all our life. And it means that when we come to these big questions of religion and philosophy, if we're not careful, we're just going to slide back into those simplisms and miss, you know, the potential for some really mind dilating stuff here that could keep us thinking about the possibilities. So it's part of why I like this dialogue that's going on in these calls between, you know, on the one hand Christianity, on another hand Judaism, on another hand Islam and Buddhism. I mean, we're trying to break up the simplisms and think about these spiritual things in more interesting ways. So that's where, you know, going back to what Stephen was saying a few minutes ago, that's where I think this is part of the reason why for chapter 6, Kenneth Smith kicks us off, not with somebody from the medieval epoch, but from the post-medieval epoch, who's carrying this mystical tradition forward in a romantic way. Very expressive, very poetic, creating vivid imagery, you know, able to say things in a way that puts Blake's finger directly on some of the key conflicts of the medieval epoch, which he's free to do because the medieval epoch is over and his life is not in danger. He can talk about these things more directly and openly. Even though he gets pushback, it's not the same kind of pushback that Joan of Arc got, say, for example. You know, it's like they're unless somebody's willing to go down in flames like Joan was, mostly the mystics are careful about how they express themselves in medieval Europe because they recognize their life's in danger if they deviate too much from the, you know, from the core canon. Joe, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Hey, I'm going to be quick here because I don't want to. I'm in kind of a public place and don't want to end up in HR. But just really quickly, you know, I just building on what you were talking about with the oversimplification, and it relates directly back to what you were saying about the text. You know, what type of relationship do you want to have with the text? Do you want to have it where you're submissive? Or do you want to have it where you're actually understanding the values and the morals themselves? And that relationship is actually really important, because once you engage with the text in a way where it's more thoughtful, you have an awareness of yourself. And so there's this introspective aspect of it. And once you know yourself, you understand your flaws. And once you understand your flaws, you also maybe have an understanding of your circumstances as well. So this comes back to the agency and contingency question as well. So there's another element of this that I think is really important when you have a submissive relationship. It's an either or kind of relationship, just as like a gross oversimplification, just as you just stated. And the reason why this can actually be seen as harmful is because of how it is. You look at somebody else doing something wrong, and you did something right, and that they didn't, that you followed the rule and they didn't, and ignoring, kind of circumstances overall. And not only that, on a scale, when you put that, kind of thinking, across an entire institution, you start to say convert or die, as you were just talking about a moment ago. You start to be able to say that because there is there's no nuance at all. So I think that is where you're starting to ignore the circumstances that an individual's actually in. And there's a less knowing of self. There has a more of a relationship of the self as somebody that is doing the right thing, and everybody else is doing the wrong thing. So, or not everybody else, but people that do the wrong thing, well, they're going to get what they deserve.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, I can imagine if you're in a public place and we're talking about religion, you're having to be careful. So I appreciate that. Yeah, it's interesting, we distinguish, the early period of a religion when it's pushing back against the cultural and political systems that exist, during its emergence. When it has a revolutionary spirit, it's trying to encourage people to think. It's trying to encourage people to question. It's saying the accepted answers aren't working. What we need you to do is ask questions, and here's some questions to get you started. To think about other possibilities. There's a way in which, disrupting easy answers and pushing for difficult questions is one of the characteristics of a revolutionary movement. But after the revolution, once the revolutionaries are in charge and now they're running things, you see this inversion that typically happens. And it might take decades, it might take centuries, but eventually any of these epochs moves into the stabilizing period where it starts to not be so excited about having people asking questions. And it wants to shift the focus from asking questions to reciting answers. We will ask the questions and we'll tell you what the answers are. And so the sign of intelligence or goodness or what have you is not that your mind dilates and you ask these questions and that you're open to dialogue with people of other religions. Now, to be a good person, you have to give the answer that we've taught you to give. And so it's the opposite of the early revolutionary period of the religion. It's at a stage where the point is thought terming cliches. It's to shut down inquiry in order to discourage schism. This goes back to what Stephen was raising, a couple 100 sessions ago, which is centripetal versus centrifugal, right? When in a revolutionary period, the way that you build your centripetal force that pulls you together into a cosmos is by having a centrifugal relationship to the existing political economy and saying that's not working anymore. We need to break away from it. We need to, it's not to use the ancient terminology, in the late Roman Empire, we're saying that late Roman Empire is not a cosmos. It's pretending to be a cosmos, but it's actually a desiccated chaos. It's locked into place. It's got rules. It's got law and order. But what it doesn't have is vitality and health. And it doesn't allow us to live, fully actualized lives anymore. It has rote roles for us to play. And if we need to live in any way other than those rote roles, then it hurts us, and it's not working anymore for people. So it's a fake cosmos. It's a law and order chaos. And so what we need then for the revolutionary period is a centrifugal force to break apart this fake cosmos and create the space in which we can now put together a real cosmos, a real vitality with its own soprasunne. And so there is this way in which for that stage of development, asking questions and being creative is the most important thing. But once the new system is in place enough that people start to invest large sums of capital or standing armies or what have you, now it becomes a big hassle if you change the fundamentals. They might lose a whole bunch of money. The army might turn against them. Who knows what might happen? And so they start to become more focused on stability, stabilizing the new order. And so there has to be, and it's It's what's really interesting to study in any epoch is that transitional period out of the revolutionary period and into the static period. How did they go about the process of inverting their values again to start to value having the right answer and not asking the difficult questions anymore? So you can see, if you think about the sequencing of Paul's epistles coming before the Gospels, you can see how Paul is part of a movement in which there are visionaries. There's wild people from the desert coming in who are seeing visions from God and speaking directly to Jesus Christ in visions, and they'll tell you what Jesus said to them, and they expect you to take them seriously. And Paul is one of those people, and he lists the names of a whole bunch of other people like that. It's a generation of traveling visionaries, right? But by the time you get into the 100s and 200s, the emerging Christian church isn't hot on this anymore, because they're trying to get an established orthodoxy that they could convince the powers that be in the Roman Empire to accept. And that's hard to do if every other day some new visionary is coming in with completely new set of revelations and you don't know what they're going to say. That might overturn everything that you all just agreed to yesterday. And so in order to stabilize, they change the nature of the Christian religion from this revolutionary, visionary driven religion to this, okay, the visionaries are now going to be in the past. The visionary era is over. No more visions, or very rarely visions. When you get into the medieval epoch around 1000, 1100, 1200, you're in an era now where the church has investigators. If someone claims to be a visionary, the church sends investigators to go find out if they're really visionaries or if they're just bullshit artists who are claiming to be visionaries. And you see that today. Even to this day, the Catholic Church sends out investigators around miracles. Was it a real miracle or somebody just hallucinating or crack-brained or what have you? Because it's that, once you're established, you have to control, you have to stabilize your religion. And that involves, some of the things that you were really excited about when you were sticking it to the previous empire, you're not so excited about when you're the empire and they might be sticking it to you. And so it's part of why the process of becoming a saint, for example, in the Catholic Church is so involved. There's got to be all these investigations and queries and so on in order to avoid having, the saint du jour popping up every other day and saying, well, God actually disagrees with everything that you're saying. God wants you to throw out all the gold and start over. They don't, the established churches don't like that. They're like, we worked hard for this. It took us thousands of years to pile up this gold. We're not going to throw it out just because some crazy wild-eyed person from the desert says, hey, Jesus wants us to be poor and take care of each other. That's not a solid enough basis. When we get further into the medieval section, we'll have a part where we talk about the life of Francis of Assisi. And you will see that this is exactly what happened with Francis of Assisi, who's criticizing the church hierarchy and, frankly, the nobility for sitting around in great piles of gold when there are poor people all over the place. He says Jesus is never the ally of the rich people. By the way, have you read any of the Gospels? Jesus is never saying, yes, have big piles of gold and sit on them. This is not the message of Jesus. And yet this is what our hierarchy is doing. Jesus says, give your gold away, right? It is easier for a rich person to pass through a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the gates of heaven, says Jesus. So Francis says our church is entirely backwards and needs to upend its value system and start taking care of the poor. And he gets a lot of heat for that. Right? That's revolutionary talk. The church is saying, well, that would have been fine if you were saying that in 400 and aiming it against the pagan Roman Empire. But don't you be saying that now and aiming it against us. Their gold was bad and needed to be broken up, but our gold is good and we want to keep it. So this goes hand in hand with the rise and flourishing and senescing of an epoch or a worldview. When do you want to help people expand their minds and think creatively and investigate the big questions? And when do you want to shut that down and get them to give the rote answers? This is how do you define intelligence? And if you look at, I'm going to call on the people who have their hands up in just a second, but I'm going to come full circle. If you look at the way that Hollywood depicts hyper intelligent people, whether it's Tony Stark in the Marvel movies, or whether it's House MD on television or what have you, to them, the smart person is the one who has the answers. That's what it means to be smart. You know the answer. And they really struggle if the show is supposed to depict intelligence in action. They're like, well, maybe he's a crazy person or just wildly creative. But they throw random, it's like throwing noodles against the wall to see if they stick. I mean, they throw sort of random attributes on there that will stand in for intelligence because they just can't dislodge the idea that being smart means having the answers. And that tells you where we are in our own epoch. We are not at the stage where being smart means asking the questions. We're at the stage where being smart means having the answers. And that means we're well past our peak. This is not a revolutionary period. Glunos, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Hi. I'm participating in the conversation about lies in politics, and I look at all religions as lies in politics because we are in need of narratives and are given to us, yeah? Why? I will explain. It's my own interpretation, the way I see it. I think the way you said right now, smart people, I would say conscious people. I believe that there are level of consciousness. The highest the conscious, there are like Jesus consciousness, Buddha consciousness. They are up somewhere closer to the universal consciousness, very much in acceptance. Jesus, maybe I'm not sure if you guys agree with me. I don't think he's I know he's depicted as a revolutionary figure, but I don't think he's very revolutionary. I'm not sure if anyone can say that's why he was executed, because he was a rebel. But anyway, it's and then at the bottom, that is the problem lies. There are people at the bottom who've got, I would say, I hope there is an intellect, but there's a very short-sighted intellect. So what they do, for example, if you tell them, go kill in the name of Allah, they go and kill without questioning. They wouldn't say, why? Why would I kill another human being like me? Why? They don't question. Or for the ideology, they are ready to do it. Or even, please don't take it against me, even love is a great narrative. There are people, love is even a scariest tool ever. If you tell them, you don't love yourself, if you love yourself, you're gonna be an egoist, narcissist person. So you better take this love and go into the world, spread the love and force it on people, your love. I don't know, force out of people love, empathy, and sympathy. That I'm scared of those people, by the way. So I think it's more consciousness level than smartness. Because if you are more in acceptance, I think you wouldn't even question. You wouldn't be submissive even. Why would you submissive? It's the life. Life is given as an experience for you to learn and to be actively participating in that life, and that's it. Being conscious, yeah?
Yes.
I think that's more important than intelligence. Being conscious is more important than intelligence.
Yes. Yes. And this is, using the ancient definitions, they would say, it isn't really intelligence until it starts to acquire the consciousness you're talking about. That kind of ability to dilate the mind, to look at the bigger picture, to question our own ideas. To the ancient Greeks, that was the definition of intelligence. And if somebody's just merely memorizing facts and doing logical deduction, learning the tools of their trade, memorizing the law, says this is like a mediocre level of intelligence. It's not conscious enough to count as intelligence. Intelligence has to be able to question itself and say, where am I wrong? Where am I being dogmatic? Where am I making assumptions? People who can't do that, to the ancient Greeks, don't have an adult mind yet. So I think they would agree with you about that. And so another way to say what I was saying before that harmonizes with what you're saying is it's during the early period when one is questioning the status quo that movements like consciousness and want to encourage consciousness and get people to wake up mentally and look at the big picture. But when an epoch stabilizes itself, once it's risen to power and people are making massive investments, they often have this inversion of values where the last thing in the world they want is people to be conscious. They want people to to just stay within their lanes and play the accepted roles that they don't think will challenge the money and the power that's been building up and accumulating. So this is it's an interesting tug of war, and the fact that it's so prominent in the medieval epoch helps us to understand our own epoch better and say, yeah, there's this tension between the people who want to have an adult mind and the society that wants them to just play simple cartoon roles and not rock the boat. All the things you're talking about play into that. So thank you, Thomas, for bringing that up. Ari, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Sure. Yeah, that was really great. I actually don't know how to say your name, so I don't want to butcher it. But the lady who just speak, maybe you could say your name for us, or someone else could help me.
Gulnaz, as it is written.
Gulnaz? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to butcher your name. I'm not good at these things, but I mean to say it in the properest ways. So this is a criticism of me, not a criticism of you. But when Gulnaz was speaking, I really like this idea. And of course, a lot of confirmation bias here. But one of the things that I study is neuroscience. Specifically, there's a book I like by Jeff Hawkins. He's a non-academic neuroscientist who kind of rejects the mainstream of where thinking they go wrong. And essentially what he's pointing out is essentially what Gulnaz is pointing out is intelligence and consciousness are like two words that are trying to describe the same idea. They are one and the same. That the higher what we would say intelligence is more one is conscious and able to do. And this is generalized by this idea of decision making. And high level decision making is about seeing one's effects in the future, but also having the context of where it's in. And this is where he actually criticizes a lot of modern machine learning, and he has his own style, that the modern machine learning is this very much like a new brain with abstraction and what we would call pure self-reference, which is called artificial intelligence. But because it lacks the old brain of actually able to perceive the world around it, having a context, it can't actually update and make real adaptivity. And so he claims that really we're not going to be getting anywhere with our attempts to get into AGI or real artificial intelligence because we miss the idea of what intelligence actually is entirely. And this is where it's just, I really agree with this, that intelligence is consciousness, that all life is intelligent on whatever level, and that's based on it's able to do stuff in its environment to make its own survival happen, right? So, and I wanted to marry this with an idea that Joe was talking about, this idea, and you were talking about with centripety versus centrifugy, or centrifugal versus centripetal, one that draws things together from the inside versus one that pushes something together from the outside. And I wanted to bring up I don't think we ever talked about this type of idea. It's called thin versus thick thinking, but it's very popular in understanding societies or goals, or in general, just someone keeping a habit or taking something on in a very robust way versus a very surface level way. And the idea is something that's thin has only a few words to describe it, and it's reduced, and it's very simple, and to some degree it's context dependent, which in this case is what Joe was saying, and I think it actually relates to, in general, contingency versus agency. The contingency is thin, and it's context dependent. If you have something, let's say the text, that you're submissive to, as soon as that text goes away, you're doing whatever you want. You don't actually have a behavior. You don't have a strong set of behaviors. It's only contingent on when this external thing is saying to you. And in general, this is actually a model of how you teach children, that at first you give them this external rule-based system that's very thin, and then they learn to internalize it, which is the thickness where you make it complex, and you make it identity-based versus goal-based, which is a little bit going back to Gulnaz's saying a paradox here, the value of narrative. Narrative is essentially a certain type of lying, by lying of omission and heavily biasing certain things and completely ignoring others. It's cherry picking the data to pick a path. And what you're doing is either to create something or to destroy something. But in general, it's this certain form of non-objective truth, which what I would call being subjective. And being human is half subjective, half objective. So in a healthy version of this, you have a dialectic between the lies of the subjectivity and the truths of the objectivity to get a personal truth. And this gets to this idea of thickness or agency. This is what you can actually decide. This is what you're conscious of. This is what you can make decisions around. And this is what thick is. And this is when someone's internalized something as their own personal truth. and versus what you would call like just pushes on you from the outside, the submissive, looking at the text from a submissive place. I'm just doing whatever it says, and whatever it says I'll do. Well, that's completely context dependent, and that's very thin, and that usually makes a person, I think, that is not going to be able to continue their way of being outside of that very small set of external situations that this applies to. As soon as those like my father tells me to, as soon as that's over, you're like, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now. But someone who's actually internalized things will be able to live this sort of sofer suni, so to speak, context independent. They'll be able to determine, according to whatever context they're in, what the behavior they're going to be. So they've sort of internalized the externality of it. Now, of course, like you said, they require the externalities there to give them a context. And this is the interesting thing if we go into a math idea of paradox, of actually Gödel's incompleteness theorem, that you can't arrive by truth by internal self-reference alone. You need an external anchor point, but if you're only with the external anchor points, you have a problem too. So essentially you need this, what I call a palentropos, you like to say palentropy, that you have this dialectic between the external internal, and that creates what's essentially consciousness, and then that is what's intelligence, and you scale up consciousness to actually get levels of intelligence. So a cell, like a single individual, single celled organism, has a form of intelligence that's just to wherever its surroundings are, to whatever it can perceive. And then like a multicellular organism, like a modern mammal or a human, perhaps, that has higher levels of the ability to perceive and abstract, has a higher level of consciousness, also means a higher level of intelligence. All right, I think that was a long speech. Thanks for listening. I hope that was good.
Thank you, Ari. That was good. You pulled together a whole bunch of different threads in the conversation into a nice little weave. I appreciate it. Phil, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I've been wanting to ask this question in a way because it seems to me like there seems to be a deep relationship between knowing and being. I think that manifests itself in a way, you could say it another way. It manifests itself in relationship to something like metaphysics and ontology. That relationship. The problem is that human beings have become, and our technology and our social structure has become so dominant that it's created a second ecosystem beyond nature, and we have to behave that as well. And in some sense, like if you are kind of like sort of eminent enlightenment. The thing is, there was a mountain before enlightenment, and now a mountain after enlightenment. It's the same mountain, but your perspectives change. Except in the modern world now, that's completely changed because let's say you live in West Virginia, and there was a mountain before enlightenment, and suddenly after enlightenment, the mountain is gone. It's like the whole environment has changed because we have affected the environment so much. So therefore, even being eminent is not going to solve the problem because the whole context has changed, right? So you had a wonderful time when you were a kid, and there was a mountain or whatever it is that you got used to, but then suddenly it's gone, and there's just devastation. So we become so powerful that we've changed that relationship to a certain degree, right? In other words, metaphysics have constructed a system that, in a sense, produce a lot of good things, but also produce a lot of bad things. And it's hard to say, well, I'm just going to abandon this. I suppose you could, although there's very little virgin land left for you to abandon it. I'm just going to abandon this and go and, live somewhere where the mountains won't be carved away.
Good
Well,
luck.
good luck, I think, So it's a funny relationship that you have to think in terms of, and that actually gets back to what, what Donald was saying, he studied philosophy, but he's interested in being, the relationship of existence and being, as well as the knowledge, because knowledge can only take you so far, knowing
Right.
Knowing is an important factor, but it can only take you so far because knowing is in a sense, an essence that allows you to uh, to know the world in relationship to being itself, because being is more fundamental. So I just want to say that the modern world is not the same as living in Greece,
Right.
it's not the same as living the Middle Ages. It's just different. And it's kind of interesting. You mentioned about, you know, uh, creation and destruction as the sustainer. It first reminded me of the Vedic tradition of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, right? And now I'm beginning to think maybe Shiva, maybe they should collapse into two. Maybe Shiva is Brahman itself, that destroys the world and creates a world. But it's in funny way, like at least in the Vedic religion to a degree I know, is that Vishnu, if not the more important God, he lasts a lot longer because he want to keep things going, right? So I mean, like like Vishnu, well, like with Krishna, I think was eight a manifestation of Vishnu, you know. And so in some sense, I remember I was studying with a group that believe very much in the Upanishads. And at one point I actually broke away from them, and they kind of they got disgusted with me because we were studying the passage where Arjuna was being helped by Krishna. And Arjuna says, well, you're just part of the system, you are a soldier, it's time to fight, and I just got really angry. It's like, I think I mean, Krishna should have gone back to heaven until, Vishnu, like, wait a minute, these guys are actually getting into understanding compassion because he doesn't want to go kill his relatives. He doesn't want to go kill whatever, you know, like they should just go back and say, well, wait a minute. It's not time to destroy the world yet, So instead, and so that's kind of interesting. Is like, Vishnu have many more manifestations, and I don't know if Shiva has a lot of manifestations of Brahma, except for creation and destruction. So we live in an expanded period of stability. At least it tries to sustain us, and so for a long epoch, I just wonder whether that's a psychological dimension of individuals or whether that's a sociological dimension of group thinking. So I'll just leave it at that, between knowing and being. That's a very, very interesting uh, dialectic, the push-pull between knowing and being. Okay, that's it, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Sorry. Bringing that issue of the centripetal and centrifugal, it's not like either one is particularly good or bad. It's a question of balance. It's where the great one, the prophet Nietzsche, went. He left rationalism because he perceived that in rationalist thought they would create the perfect world. There's a problem with perfection. It's death. So he went for a sort of a living philosophy, which was a constant balance between different dynamics. And for example, the centrifugal is a bit like the French Revolution, where every crazy is running in every direction, going on about everything under the sun. And of course, that has a certain energy in it, a certain power, but it couldn't last. And you get the centripetal in the form of Napoleon. This is Napoleon and the revolution were opposites. This has been the story of America in recent times, when every nonsense theory in existence, America's been very successful, created a very successful base. And the trouble with success is when people get the things that really matter, they need to find stupid things to bark on about, like climate change and all the other socialism and all the other forms of nonsense. Now, I mean, when it came to the Franciscans, I would have been on the side of the church. I would have been sitting in the chair with all the finery on me, realising the church is something to be kept going. It must serve man through the eons. And these Franciscans, these ragged beggars, all running around with their arms floating around in every direction. They would impoverish the church and impoverish society, and the whole thing would come down. So this is the point. So see, yeah, it's a bit of a question here about this dynamic in society. A good example, I suppose, is the story of the miller, his son, and the donkey, where this is democracy at work, where they pass each crowd, and each crowd says, "Oh, why don't you put the son on the back of the donkey?" There's the next crowd says, "Oh, you lazy son, you're letting your father walk." This is democracy at work. Every bit of nonsense you can come up with. And that's a centrifugal. And of course, they lose the donkey in the end. That falls over the side into the river. And the centripetal's following him as the old guy coming along and said, "When you try to please everybody, you'll please nobody." And now you've got your Napoleon, Donald's, to keep you all in line. But he's the beginning of many. He might get assassinated, but you'll get another emperor, and then another one. You'll assassinate that one, and then you'll get an emperor who's smart enough to survive, like Augustus. Anyway, getting back to the text, so we've gotten up to the bit about Mark and Messiah. So, okay, there's the other angle. What is beyond dispute, he was a moral genius. Revolutionary in values. Well, that might not be absolutely the case, because I think a lot of the stuff they claim that Jesus was going on about was stuff that had already, there were ideas that were already floating around. So he must have been something more than just ideas. Even today, the values he laid down keep rolling in spite of everything. I see a Franciscan sympathiser there. In spite of everything the church can do to pave them over, well, no. We're the side that keeps the church going through the ages. Sorry, that's not right. Anyway, of course, we're bringing back to the life of Jesus, and of course, it has some fascinating questions there. For example, feeding 4,000 and then 5,000. Now, he had a rich mate, and suddenly he was getting big crowds, and he probably said to the rich mate, "Well, we've got to feed all these people." And the rich mate, was convincing, This is the way to get to heaven, Joseph, a bearer for me, feed the masses. And so I don't know whether this was a unique feature of Jesus's time, because I imagine there are a lot of people like Jesus running around, but he pulled the big crowds finally in his last year, which there wouldn't have been that many, I suppose, if we believe it. So we'll just accept it on faith that he did succeed in pulling the big crowds. And this is going to make all the difference, whether that religion goes on or fails. So yeah, I just thought I'd highlight now, there's things called facts. I think Ari was quite curious about that. There's things called facts and there's things called values. But and morals are a type of value, but we've got to be careful here because Nazi Germany was full of morals.
Yes.
It was full of values, not facts. I mean, you know, there's nothing rather infactual as, you know, Hitler believing he could conquer the world, despite even his, you know, advisors warning, well, no, we can't conquer Russia. Distance will defeat us. He didn't bother with facts. I mean, the idea of exterminating the Jews, that's a moral theory. That's not a fact. It's not a fact saying that, oh, we're the good people and they're the bad people. That's values. So be careful with values. I keep on trying to point out, values deal with good and evil. If you have you know, in the Bible, you have the 10 Commandments. There are positive values, but the most of it's thou shalt not do this wicked thing. So values are about good and evil. You go back to the Old Testament, good and evil, not just good. Morals aren't just good. They're about the question of evil as well, because values are about things which are not facts. Good and evil in the ordinary sense are not scientific thecs. Anyway, so there are other things, you know, the question of the moral genius and the question of the people that really keep things going and keep troublesome types like the Franciscans in their place. Thank you. Sorry for the long ramble.
That's okay. Thank you, Stephen.
We've lost no Sam.
Oh, sorry, my bad. Yeah, so yeah, thanks for talking about that. You know, this thing about Jesus as not as a get out of hell token, but as a teacher, someone to talk to and make you think about things. That's the Jefferson, right? The Thomas Jefferson version of Jesus. He made the copy of the Bible where he cut everything out of the New Testament except the things Jesus actually said and said, "This is my Bible." my Bible is, I want to be in a dialogue with this guy. I don't care about all that other stuff. I want my mind to dilate. I want to think about these issues. I want to, you know, someone to teach me to have greater moral intelligence than I had beforehand. You know, this question of values being good and values being evil, it's partially a linguistic problem and it's partially an epochal problem, because to the ancient Greeks, distinguishing healthy values from unhealthy values was the most important thing in the world. They were more likely to have one word for healthy values and a whole separate word for unhealthy values than they were to have a word that meant both. But in the modern world, we have a word that means both, but we don't have words for each of the two separate ones. So we can't distinguish food from poison. Stuff you put in your mouth is stuff you put in your mouth. And you're not supposed to ask, is this going to kill me? What will this lead to? What kind of a society will it create if I do these things? This is not, we're too practical for that in the modern world. We're like, whatever it is you want. If you want to eat poison, then eat poison. Distinguishing poison from healthy food, that's just, you know, navel gazing, philosophical nonsense. We only care about the pragmatic way to achieve what you want to achieve. And this is our blind spot, right? So for us, an institution that oppresses all its members is healthy, because it exists and it's rich and it has power, it has police forces. We think that's we confuse that with centripetal. We say, look, it's law and order, it's working. But to the ancient Greeks, to be a cosmos, it couldn't just be a large scale structure that was healthy and maintaining itself. All of its component structures were also organisms, and they also had to be healthy. So if the whole oppresses the individuals, it's not a cosmos from the Greek perspective. They're easily able to distinguish a tyranny from a monarchy. And to the Greeks, the monarchy is the one where the ruler has sophrosune and so leads all the people into healthier lives, whereas a tyranny is just some dude who wants to be in charge of things and makes everything worse because, you know, just tells everyone what to do and he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. So, and to Aristotle, making that distinction, the sophrosune distinction, was the most important thing to do. It was the highest of all the values. It was the critical faculty. So he might not have said that Napoleon represented centripetal force, right? He might have said that Napoleon is another form of chaos. It's a form of organized chaos, but the people he's pulling together don't want to be there. And trying to bring them together by force, you create a society that has enormous internal centrifugal force to fly apart because they don't. Well, as we see when he tries to invade Russia, right before your example of Napoleon followed by Hitler is very good, because Hitler's just mimicking Napoleon with the whole who's the biggest conqueror. So Napoleon says, I can compel Europe to be centripetal. I will pull it together. I will even pull Russia together into my greater French empire. And in doing so, he's missing the Aristotelian observation, which is, would it be healthy for all of these countries and all of their peoples to pull together into this greater whole? Or is it just a shell of a whole that actually makes everybody sick and that flies apart? It's really hard to say in English. These distinctions, we lack the words for them, but it's really easy in Greek. And it's part of why I really value, Stephen, the way you introduce centripetal and centrifugal into this, because it gives us a way to use English words to talk about philia versus nekos, these critical Greek terms.
It was in the text
Yeah.
earlier on.
Yeah.
I have come across the concept in other places.
Yeah. But you spotlighted it for us, right? Just like Joe spotlighted agency versus contingency. You helped us to see how much these issues permeate all of this discussion. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. Speaking of Joe, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, so my comment was actually from a little bit while ago. And again, I'm going to be brief and mindful of what of the language that I use. I do like what was brought up earlier about the idea of consciousness versus intelligence. And I think it actually directly relates just what you're talking about with moral values. So if you look at it in terms of, intelligence, right, that's very much what people were measuring during the Second World War. And what was intelligence? It was the ability to shape objects in the world, right? That you were able to produce things. Now, whether those things were good was another question. And so that's where there's distinction between consciousness and intelligence is actually very important. But even more important than that is that I think it highlights the Stephen's point about the idea of values. Because values have to be good, so to speak, in order for things to turn out well. Otherwise, things turn out poorly because people there's an example of an AI. Everybody knows this example of like the paperclip maximizer, where it's just taught to maximize and create paper clips by all means necessary, and that's essentially what it does, and it ends up basically destroying the world as a result. And by not knowing what is good, essentially that is where intelligence was. That nobody could deny that the AI or whatever is intelligent and that it can shape an object in the world, as I was just saying, but is it pursuing what is good? And so that's kind of the example that you can see where it can lead to something that is actually obviously a less than desirable outcome. There were a couple other things that I wanted to bring up as well, but I'll just address one quick. Is the idea of impoverishing a institution or an individual. I think that's where you turn into the opposite. But I do think that there's this natural I think there's a natural move away from religion at this point, and the people need healthy alternatives. So I think Stephen's right. Not by impoverishing something, that's not necessarily going to be helpful. but by providing alternatives as to, other philosophies of life and how to desire what is good and to how to develop really good values is something that is absolutely necessary in today's world. And so that comes back to the whole point of values, right? Of how do you make sure that you have a society that actually desires what is good? What is worth pursuing, what is not worth pursuing, which is actually more important is like what is not worth pursuing. So when you look at it from that perspective, I think that obviously the question about facts and values and how they can be distorted or they can be something that leads to something better, it's an important point. There are some things about self-reference I wanted to bring up, but I'm not going to go on forever. The creative destruction point is really interesting as well. I think that that's really important to come back to because that is where you're turned into your opposite. It's like the minute you end up getting power, it's like you're unable to give it up, so that you're actually preventing anything from that threatens that power structure. But it's like almost the church. If you were to say that revolutionary attitude that actually allowed it to rise to power, but then it got the power and became the institution itself. And so it's and obviously in that particular instance, it's almost like in economic terms, rent seeking. It's looking to remain in power when it ought not. And that's what comes back to this natural occurrence, is that you don't have to destroy something, you just have to let things evolve. Anyway.
Thank you, Joe. Phil, come off mute and tell us. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, Phil, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, it seems to me the most fundamental point is that these relationships are dynamic. They're always changing, so therefore you have to always keep it in balance. It's not as if when it get out of balance, what happened is it goes too far one direction or another. So the dynamic relationship leads to a kind of, well, I wouldn't say a groundless ground, but a kind of ever shifting ground. So you have to adjust your relationship with it. I was attending actually yesterday this thing that the guy who's talking about the early Greeks, but he's very much of a Heidegger person, and I was talking to him about, I point out something that I said, it's kind of interesting about this relationship between knowing and being, and they need to be in balance in some sense. And he's much more, I guess, interested in being, and and I have to, I'll say that one thing I said to him about at the end of our discussion, I said, I want to know what exactly happens in the clearing. For those of you that don't know Heidegger, the clearing is the metaphor is, you walk in the dark woods and suddenly the metal appears and everything opens up and clears up. And so you're able to see the foreground and the background. Of course, the foreground is always like something that you're conscious of and pay attention to. The background is like, it's there, but it's sort of like, I wouldn't say it's subconscious, but it's not emerging in your front of consciousness in some sense. And that's an important part, because in the clearing you could see all the relationships, but you equivocate back and forth in order to understand the relationships as a kind of whole in some sense. And that's kind of an enlightenment of being itself. And I asked him, like, yeah, that's interesting. I want to know where this lighting up comes from, because to what degree does it come from Dasein, and to what degree it comes from being, right? So when you go into the clearing, one way of interpreting it, I don't want to overstate it, but is that being itself shines through And you say, aha, I understand what's going on. That's an important thing to deal with. And that would be one way of seeing being, that you are a consciousness that's in a sense waiting for being to appear, and it appears in some way, okay? Or as being, another way you could interpret it, is you're walking through the woods, but at night. You suddenly come to the clearing and everything's dark. It doesn't light up as it would be. But you happen to have a very powerful flashlight. You shine it and it comes forward. Like, wow, in other words, to what degree does Dasein, whether there's an individual or culture, has this, it dependent on this powerful flashlight that can show the cosmos as it really is. Without it, it's just dim and dark. Like it's almost always in the twilight or at midnight. You can't see it because it doesn't shine through by itself. I said, what is the relationship and which is the dominant relationship? Does being shine forth and you suddenly recognize it? Is that what enlightenment is? Or have we become so technologically advanced and, in terms of knowing, that we just shine our light of knowing and the world and being pops forward? Like, wow, this is fantastic. It was just sort of dim and dark. It was just a pile of junk. But now, like, wow, this is like differentiated. And and he didn't like the way I put it. So, and he said something else, but I forgot what it was. And then I also had I questioned him about the clearing itself, And I said, this part is not so much a philosophical question, but more of how to deal with it at the linguistic twist. What if you were American, you came to this continent, and there was these dim intellectual Native Americans, they're cluttering up the place. And manifest destiny calls you to, in a sense, wanting to create the land, the relationship, through manifest destiny, to clear the land so that you could manifest what liberal democracy would be. Is clearing a way of justifying genocide? Just clear those bastards away. They don't know anything, just clear them away. Is that what clearing is? Because, I mean, when you think about it, that's what the Americans did. They might have an idealism that's different, but they did the clearing. And in fact, the Nazis was inspired by the American clearing. Clear those damn Jews out of here, In fact, let's burn them up. So clearing could have another meaning, once it's taken politically, as human beings, it's a different meaning. But if you lay on top politics, those guys are standing in your way of manifest destiny, from sea to shining sea. And it's lucky we had some Eastern liberals who sort of put a stop to it, but not after we wiped out most of them. I mean, it wasn't for those damn Eastern liberal Democrats, we would have no American Indian problem. They've been cleared away. I mean, it's just a very complex and interesting is I told him I love Heidegger, but I also have a problem with it. He said, well, you love Heidegger, except you don't. It's kind of like you love lamb, but you want to get rid of the lamb taste, right? Whether you put in a curry or whatever, you say, oh yeah, this now tastes good. It's no longer pure lamb taste, right? And he accused me of that. And I said, no, I think maybe yes. Heidegger, despite the fact that he was a very good philosopher, he was very provincial. He did not have the cosmos in mind. And that's why he fell into the Nazi propaganda, the Nazi genocide, you know. And so that part of Heidegger, I mean, anybody who loves Heidegger has to deal with that aspect of Heidegger, right? So anyway, I thought I would say something about the clearing. Where being supposed to appear, but how does it appear? Is it through technos, or is it through being itself? That's it, Phil.
Thank you, Phil.
Hey, that should make you happy, Donald.
Very nice, Phil.
Geneva, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I wanted to ask for some clarification about this centripetal versus whatever, you know what I mean. And something that Joe said as well about the good and the moral. And of course, my question is, can we know what's good or moral without first doing what's wrong and what doesn't work? Because then we see, okay, that doesn't work, that wasn't good, blah, blah, blah. And then we can change our course. And it seems to me that that is what human life is all about, is we don't just, or I don't think we're just born knowing what's good, knowing what's moral, knowing what's right. So there are mistakes that have to be made. And this is where I think a new way, I don't want to say it's the best way, but what we find in making these mistakes is another avenue. It's a friction of that wrongness, that what doesn't workness, if those are such words, that create something new, which then we can go on that path and find out if that path works. And so I guess I was a little bit confused by the centripetal verses, because it seems like we need both. Like one is not better than the other. We need both. We need that push. We need that chaos, so that when we come out of it, we've created something new that may work. That probably will work better than what we started with. So I was just wondering, is that kind of the concept, or am I missing something?
That's a great question, Geneva.
Yeah.
And it really gets to the heart of the difference between the modern conception of chaos and the ancient conception of chaos. So the modern conception of chaos is that chaos is the opposite of law and order. And so an orderly society is a good society, and a chaotic society is a bad society. An orderly society is a rational society, and a chaotic society is an irrational society. We have these very simple kindergarten level absolute divisions between the two, as though they're irreconcilable. And we inherit them from medieval cosmology, the concept that the purpose of good is to destroy evil. We have to eliminate all evil and then have a purely perfectly good cosmos. And heaven will be only good, you know, and hell will punish the bad, and the end, period. Nothing to think about, because it's all the answers are there. And it doesn't take long being exposed to, you know, non-medieval alternatives to realize that there are many other ways of looking at these relationships that are more nuanced and better able to describe the real world. So, for example, science, you know, people who don't understand science say it's about having facts and knowing the truth. But people who do understand science say that that's exactly the opposite. It's about having questions and learning to respect your mistakes and paying attention to your mistakes. So someone who prides themselves on always being correct has to cover up all their mistakes, because the mistakes prove that they're not always correct, and they don't want that in their brand. They're trying to purify their brand. And so because they're covering up their mistakes, they're not learning from them, which means they're not growing and improving, and all the things that you're alluding to in your question. Whereas science says, on the contrary, the surest way to the truth is through error. And we do it by acknowledging our error and cherishing our errors, because the error is the opportunity to see we've got something wrong in here that needs to be fixed. And you know, reality is trying to tell us a little bit about why it's wrong, and maybe we can learn from that and grow and develop. So these issues, you know, if we take the modernist notion of chaos, it's strictly a bad thing, and of course we want to purge it. But the ancient conception of chaos is different. It's completely orthogonal to that. It's unrelated. The ancient conception of chaos isn't about the absence of law and order. Chaos is about the failure of an organism. Not that it made a mistake, but it's dying, it's sick, it's falling apart. So learning from your mistakes is healthy. Making mistakes and learning from them is healthy. And so the Greeks would say that's cosmos, not chaos, because any organism has a healthy relationship with its own errors and learning and growing and developing, and that's part of cosmos. Cosmos is about health and soprasune and vitality and what Nietzsche's will to life, you know, all the things that are required to become a healthy organism. And soprasune in the Greek concept doesn't just include our individual life, but also the larger cosmos that we create through our relationships with other organisms. That together, not only are we healthy as an individual, but we're healthier together. And this is one of the things that's very hard to say in modern English, is, you know, what is it that is good, not just for me as an individual, but also for society and for the larger ecosystem. And conversely, what is it that's good, not just for society, but also for me at the same time? And to the Greeks, all of this is bound up in the concept of cosmos, that the health has to be working on all these levels, or it's not really true health, right? And then so chaos, so learning, making mistakes and learning from mistakes, that would be cosmos, that would be, you know, part of soprasune. Whereas trying never to make a mistake, or at least trying to cover up one's mistakes, that would be chaos, because the failure to learn from our mistakes decreases the chances that we're going to learn and be healthy and relate to the larger world well. And so it's the chaos of falling apart. And so to the Greeks, you know, an orderly society can be a chaos, because it's stagnant and it's oppressing the people that are in it, and they don't want to be there. And because it's not doing the things that are necessary for either its long-term survival or the long-term survival of the larger world around it. If it has the health of a tumor, where it's healthy, but it's making the larger organism sick, then the Greeks wouldn't call that a cosmos. It's a chaos, right? Because it's disrupting the part to whole relationship, you know, that which also has to be healthy for it to be cosmos. So centripetal and centrifugal, you know, there's a lot of ways to talk about them, but what I like to do is take Stephen's definition of centripetal and centrifugal and focus it through that ancient lens and say, to be centripetal, the forces have to actually be increasing the health of the whole and the parts at the same time. It has to be health and vitality, it has to be cosmos oriented in the ancient Greek sense of the world. Then it's centripetal. So if it's just Charlemagne burning all the sacred groves and stealing all the gold from the pagans and telling everybody that they have to now say that they're Christian or else they'll stick a sword through their neck, that's not really a cosmos. It's a fake cosmos. It's a chaos that's branding itself a cosmos. Or when Napoleon decides to conquer Europe, or when Hitler decides to conquer Europe. These are all, they may be imposing order, but it's a chaos. It's a kind of, you know, using the Greek term, it's a chaos dressed up as an order, because it's not ultimately healthy. And then so likewise, centrifugal would be, again, I like to run it through that Greek lens. It would be anything, any force within the society that causes it to be less healthy, either as a whole or to cause its members to be less healthy because it oppresses them or tyrannizes them or deprives them or what have you. So again, if we use this ancient interpretation of centripetal and centrifugal, we get this great explanatory power that we inherit from the ancients. But it means we kind of have to, like you suggested we do, we have to slow down and talk about what we mean by these terms, because otherwise it's too easy to, I mean, this is modern English's curse, right? You can use the same word and absolutely mean opposite things and not notice that it's happening.
it seems to me Geneva's question has a lot to do with Hegel in relationship to society
Of
and
course it
time.
does.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Of course it does. Phil.
I heard the
Yeah.
Hegel. Yes.
I can't help it.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. I appreciate it. Thank you, Geneva.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. That was a great response.
Yay. Hey, Joe, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, I'll just make a really quick comment about, what Geneva just brought up is that, do we have to fail in order to actually, in order to learn what is right and what is good? Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an absolute answer to that. And I think that you've described how there's a dialectic in that process that enables you to actually come to what is a right conclusion. And that coming back to it, though, even if you were to think about the right or wrong example from earlier and how that relates directly to covering up mistakes, so that where a system can be adaptive or it can be static. And where it's adaptive is that essentially it's able to make a mistake and recognize but adapt to the new circumstances that it's currently in. And so by doing that, then you're basically mimicking something like nature. But let's say now you're just kind of covering up your mistake because you're trying to maintain your position, let's just say. Well, then obviously your values are no longer actually appropriately aligned, and you're unable to replace what was wrong with what is right. And that is obviously a big problem, because one of the things that I do fear about things like AI, other than the fact that it doesn't have an experience and all those other big issues, is that it is you're taking information and it's kind of weaponizing it in certain circumstances, and where the idea of kind of how it looks at making a mistake is very different than the way humans would look at making a mistake per se. Actually, that wasn't the best explanation, because I had a whole thing that I wanted to say about that. But anyway, the reason why I was just bringing it up more than anything else is I think that it was really a very important point, is the idea of how it relates to values, making mistakes, and adaptive systems versus systems that don't adapt and that are static, and that these are entrenched structures that don't give up their power. And anyway, that's all.
Thank you, Joe. Donald, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
I just wanted to get in line to praise Geneva. It's not every week that we have someone make a truly philosophical observation. We talk a lot about existentialism, but we don't talk so much about how an existentialist gets to know themselves. They need to, in order to get sophrosune, to have, but they have to do. I think that was very nice, Geneva. Of just, I mean, you might use that too, in a wider context. There are many philosophies that have an ideology that tells you what your nature is. Got it figured out for you. Might just apply your little observation, your test that you came up here, to see who's being philosophical and who's not, or who's pretending to be, being in appearance. Maybe Phil will like that. Plato, being in appearance, Phil. The dietitian and the cook, Thank you, Geneva.
Thanks, Donald.
Thanks to you both. Ariel, welcome to the call. Come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Can I pass for a moment? I'm in the middle of something. I'm sorry. Bad
sure.
timing.
Sure, yeah. Just put your hand up again when you've got an opportunity to talk, and I'll call on you again. Sharon, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I would like to go back to the text.
Yay!
Because I think the discussion we're having is all in the text. The second paragraph, particularly to Geneva's question as whether or not you need to make mistakes to figure things out. Yes, you do to some extent. But it says, as Blake had the perspicuity to realize, to say of Jesus that he's a moral genius may indeed be the divinely appointed limit of the human condition. And then we skip down a couple of sentences where it says, what Blake grasps is ingenious, but contrary to all the simplism and absolutism of the know-nothing Christians. He sees that God has carried out the work of spiritualizing man over the course of history. The stages and task, and not once and for all, and not by means of just one unique individual. Man has to be cultured into spirituality, and he cannot attain it in one fell swoop. Now, I'm going to assume that spirituality means morality, and that's an assumption on my part, and being right or wrong. So it's a process. I don't know if that's Hegel or Kierkegaard, but what Blake is saying here, that this is a process under which we go through. So I just wanted to bring us back to the text.
Yay! Thank you, Sharon. And you're right. It does directly address what she's talking about. I mean, this is that issue, right? There's the only way that if Blake is right, and we're going to have to be spiritualized incrementally over time, if we don't get a simple pay your money, get your spiritualization, but instead we have to keep learning, then that means it's going to be an error-driven process, right? That's
correct.
You got to try things. We learn by doing. That's almost that. If there's anything that goes to the core of existentialism, I mean, that's got to be it, right? That our ideologies are all well and good, but we have to act in the world and see what happens, because that gives the world the chance to teach us where we're wrong, help us to be better.
However, I must say, and this is my personal philosophy, you learn by doing, but you must heed the guidance that's in your life.
Yes.
That's your parents, the adults who are ahead of you with wisdom, particularly the old people, because they have it, and I'm one of them now, right? And so learn by doing, but with the boundaries.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. It's a dialectic, isn't it? Because
yes,
as they say about mushrooms, all mushrooms are edible, but some of them are only edible once. Yeah, so you'd really not like to learn by doing which ones are only edible once. You'd like a book or a guide to tell you, don't eat that one. I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying you'll never get a second chance, because that sucker's poisonous. There's certain mistakes we'd like to head off through paying attention to the people who've learned it the hard way and can tell us, how not to repeat their mistakes. So yeah, I guess you're right. It's dialectical, isn't it? You've got to combine both sources of wisdom as best you can.
Because I'm getting totally lost in the discussion here till I looked at the text. I said, it's here. I just need to understand what they're saying.
Yes. And part of what he's talking about in these sentences that you're citing is the way if Jesus is taken to be a God from the beginning and therefore perfect and all-knowing and all-powerful and so on, then we're deprived of the opportunity to see somebody learn to be wise and learn how to teach and learn how to talk to people. And we're deprived then of an example to follow, using what Donald says, Kenneth says about the Aristos. If you want to be an Aristos, you have to find one and follow them around. You need an example that you can learn from and try to study and emulate. But if Jesus is a dude, then we can learn from him, because we're mortals too. And so, we can learn how to how to try and to learn and to do better. But if Jesus is perfect from the beginning and doesn't make any mistakes, then what is there for us to learn? We're never going to work on that level. We have to be able to make mistakes and learn incrementally. So if the only path to morality is, you're born with it because you're a god, the end, then that means we're all screwed. So it creates too big a chasm morally between us and the process of maturation. It creates a kind of infantilism or pacification. And so there's potent existentialist moral issues at stake in this interpretation of Jesus as a human being who's a teacher, who had to learn things for himself, and now he can pass them on to others so that we can learn them too. That's a path that we could do something with. You see the same thing in Islam with Muhammad, right? Islam is very clear on the fact Muhammad's not a god. He's a guy. He's there to teach you things. He's not to create an inseparable chasm, between people and doing right. Same with, as Phil likes to point out, the Buddha. He's like, I learned this the hard way, that we should have compassion for each other and we shouldn't be so attached to the things that we want. We should be skeptical about the things we should want, and we should be compassionate to other people who are struggling and suffering. And he heard that, he figured it out the hard way, and he's here to tell us that we too can figure it out. If he could do it, we can do it. It's an empowering religious experience and relationship. And so you can see how it lends itself to the existentialist position. So that's kind of part of what he's talking about here in these paragraphs. So thanks for highlighting that, for bringing us to the text, Sharon. Oh, you want to add something? Go ahead.
And I just make one last point, because the guidance that I talk about, and Joe mentioned this, that there are less people interested in participating in religion of any kind in today's environment. And there's a reason for that. And this is a question that I ask myself. There are two phases to the practice of religion. There's a business of religion, and then there's the faith itself.
Yes.
And the business of religion has really run amok, so to speak. With the Catholics, we have the sexual scandals. With the Baptists, we also have sexual scandals there. And so the message gets lost in all of this. So individuals who are trying to hone and grow their faith see these transgressions and get lost and lose faith in the participation. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think is one of the problems today, right?
Yes. And it's to go back to the Greek orientation on that, what's happening is the tug of war between douloi, banausoi, and aristoi for what is religion going to be allowed to be. And to the douloi, religion has to please us. That's its purpose, is to please us, make us feel good. And if it asks hard questions, well, then what's the point of it? It's supposed to be like Santa Claus. I want a pony and a red wagon and a BB gun and a puppy and so on. For the banausoi, religion is an extension of the market, because everything's an extension of the market. There's nothing else that exists. The ecology is an extension of the market. The cosmos, God is an extension of the market. To the banausos, there's nothing else. Only things that could be counted and added up on spreadsheets. And that might excite a banausos who's trying to fit things onto the Procrustean bed of counting. But to the rest of us, it's dehumanizing. It's not inspiring, right? I mean, for me, growing up in the 70s, every Sunday morning was all these televangelists saying, that what you want you want to be saved, send me your money. What's that? Bad things are happening, send me your money. Oh, is there a hurricane bearing down on New Orleans? Send me your money. And at some point you figure out, I don't think God wants all this money. I don't think you speak for God. I think you're a flaming hypocrite who's just trying to con people. And it's impossible to be inspired by the message of, your money or your life. That's just humiliating, and it's obscene, because it's not like we don't need values. We need help figuring out what to do in life. There's so many ways to go wrong, and to have the people claiming to play that role turn out to so often be con men, it does significant damage to a society. I mean, Aristotle would say that too, right? This is one of the vital organs of civilization, and you can't afford to mistake a con game for genuine religion. You need genuine religion. You don't need a con game. That's got to go. And any society that not only allows but encourages the replacement of the real life-giving thing with, endless cons designed to separate you from your wallet is a society that is not a society at all. It's a chaos. That's just three, as they say, three chaoses standing on each other's shoulders, wearing a trench coat, pretending to be a cosmos. It's not actually what it's pretending to be. It's a poison pretending to be a healthy drink. So, yeah. Thank you for bringing this stuff up, Sharon. All right, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
I'm trying to think how to relate it to the text, but I mostly want to get on the Geneva praise bandwagon of actually doing real philosophy here and learning something really high level. But definitely bringing it back to the text, at least understanding Jesus in the context of many different dialectics, not just one, right? And so getting to this understanding of he learned from his mistakes so that we can learn from our mistakes, me personally, is a much more powerful narrative for me to create a philanthropy. I can't say the word, but the versus the bringing together versus spinning apart. I find that very powerful and internalizing that. And this is also how I study the Bible in general. Is I do not looking at these things like they're superheroes or machines or angels. I like to think that they're just like me in the sense that, well, how can I learn from what they went through? And is this something that I'm going through or whatever, right? I can relate to them. It really makes sense. So, and I think I wanted to talk about it. It's basically already answered it very nicely. I don't remember who exactly said it, but this idea of Geneva talking about learning from our mistakes. Well, there's something else going on there, obviously, which is the learning from mistakes has a statement before it. It smuggles in some baggage that there was something that is a mistake and something that isn't a mistake, and we have essentially a hypothesis, like in scientific language, or at least in the religious language. There's a narrative, something maybe not that necessarily different from each other. We have a narrative, and then is reality approving of our narrative or our hypotheses, or disapproving, is rejecting or accepting? Does it match up, right? And the whole point of this is that then the new information allows us to update our model. And the point is that I'm saying is every question of is this a mistake or not supposes a model. And this is where I want to get to very nice of what's so valuable at this, to me, the aha moment was this is literally exactly how neuroscience says the brain works. You have a model of what's going on inside you, a simulation, a hallucination, whatever. That's what experience and consciousness actually are. We don't attend anything in the real world. We just attend the interaction of the real world and our external sensory organs, and they make sort of electrical signals or light signals, and that creates something inside of us that we experience. But we're just a brain in a black box. We don't have access to the real world. We don't have access to others. We can't control others. We can influence things for sure, but we don't actually have any real access to this. And the point was that we have a model that's within ourselves. And the whole nature of the way neurochemicals work with basically reward prediction error, this is feeling good about something or feeling not, is literally what it sounds, reward prediction error. How much are we making mistakes and learning from those mistakes, and how much can we tolerate those mistakes where they're too painful or too dangerous? The point of pain is to say this might be a mushroom that'll kill us, right? Let's say you eat a mushroom and it half kills you, right? You don't want to be like, nothing happened, I'll just try that again. No, it destroys your insides and you feel a terrible amount of suffering, teaching you the lesson, don't ever eat this mushroom ever again, right? So pain is this updating process, and we can only handle so much of it. So we don't want to take unnecessary pain, or unnecessary suffering is generally agreed upon as really bad. But the thing that's really cool is suffering or discomfort of any type, whether it be extreme amounts like pain or real amount like affliction, but in small amounts, just discomfort. This is actually the signature in the brain that the brain is rewiring. This is what you call, so dopamine is when you have prediction is predicted correctly. You're like, oh, this is working, that feels good. But as soon as that is prediction error, literally what's cool is the precursor molecule of adrenaline, which means adrenaline is made out of dopamine. When dopamine crashes, it turns into adrenaline, which is the signature that I feel anxious, I feel nervous, there's something going on. So it's like, yeah, I feel great, I'm going to go get my treasure, or I'm going to get my ice cream, and then the container is empty. You have this adrenaline that pops in, you have the dopamine crash, right? So one literally makes the other. And so in the biological system, you have this need to make mistakes. But again, needing to make mistakes, the whole purpose of making mistakes is to update the model. And so if your model is so rigid that you can't even see mistakes, you're like old and static, then you don't ever feel bad because you're never making mistakes and you're purely delusional. You're based on pure self-reference. You're just an assimilating model, but you can't accommodate any new information. And in a younger model, especially talking about the earlier parts of Christianity, it's growing. It needs more information. It's growing. It's trying to build itself as a revolutionary, right? So it's very creative. And this is where we're in the creative state. We're looking for more information. We're trying to gather it in. We're trying to make a model because the model isn't firm yet. But there's a certain point when the transformation of values happens. You're describing when the model flips, and now we're not willing to update the model anymore because we think the model is perfect. And so there's this polyentropy of a dialogue between, is the model fixed and can we update the model? Should we update the model? Or is it just an endless waste of time to just, because the other part of this is you get to paralysis if you're always updating the model when you don't have a model. So you need something that actually works, right? So it's a nice dialogue between this. If I'm always questioning, oh, should I do this? Oh, should I not do this? Then you never do anything, right? Like, should I pick up my kids on time? Should I be late? Well, that was a half hour ago. They need to be picked up, right? So like, you have to take action. So I like this very much what Janine is saying. And the reason this is so, I want to bring it home with a soft landing. The reason I love it so much is because this is literally one of the closest essential structurally invariant aspects of reality itself between ideas and biology. Biology is an updating system that needs mistakes in order to learn, in order to live. Yet too many mistakes means death, right? So it's like death is on either side, and you have to walk this narrow path of having a model and then having mistakes. I was going to say more about a growth mindset with Carol DeWitt. This essentially is the last thing between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. A growth mindset is when you're accommodating new information and you're in explorer mode because anything new is not a mistake. There's no such thing as a mistake. It's just exploring and novelty. And so everything helps you map the territory. But when your model is so fixed that you need it to be perfect, anytime there's a mistake on the map versus territory, that's a mistake and that's a problem. You failed the test. Your design is going to fall apart, right? So the fixed mindset keeps one going for a longer time, and for a very sensitive system, you can't have any error at all, but it means you can't adjust it at all. Well, the growth mindset allows for enough mistakes to happen where it won't collapse and still accommodate new information. All right, thanks. That was good.
Thank you, Ari. That was great. Yes, acknowledging mistakes. My wife's been getting these they're dilly bars for desserts, and they're a cherry on the outside and almond ice cream on the inside, and they smell heavenly. I mean, they smell so good. I'm really allergic to dairy. I mean, I'll have bronchitis for weeks. It'll knock me out. So I can't have them. And I was just admiring them for a while, and I finally decided, I should see if maybe somebody makes a non-dairy version of that. I mean, it's a big world. There's all kinds of people innovating. I add it. I go onto the grocery list and look around, and hey, look at that! It's somebody's made one. It's cherry and almond. That's fantastic. And I order it, and a week later I go into the freezer, and there it is, and I reach for it, and I see it's cherry almond ice cream. And I'm like, oh, did Beverly order cherry almond ice cream too? Where's my cherry almond non-dairy ice cream? And it took me a little bit to clue in that what had happened is the biggest food issue I have that I would have said I would never make a mistake on. I was so excited about the aroma of the cherry almond that I just picked the first thing on the list and just assumed it was non-dairy because I wanted it to be non-dairy, even though I know I would get myself in real trouble if I were to eat it. And so we've got it sitting there in the fridge, and Beverly doesn't know why it's there because she didn't order it. She's the only one who can eat it. And I'm sitting there going, hey, it turns out not only can you forget irrelevant information, you can forget the most important information that you would have swore you personally wouldn't. This is my strong suit. This is the middle of my batting wheelhouse. There's no way I can make a mistake there, except, oh well, I did. I blew it. So now I just have to dream of that heavenly aroma of cherry almond. Stephen, come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
Geneva's point there, which is one which has sort of been on my mind for a while now, and this is the question of the perfection versus experimentation. There's something that goes back into medieval literature when you have the story of Sir Percival. In Camelot, Sir Percival is the one that's always making the mistakes. The other knights are smarter, and they're pretty much on top of Sir Percival until they have to leave Camelot to go and find the Holy Grail. Sir Percival is the one that gets through because he realises his limitations. The other knights think that they're smarter than the average bear. And, Sir Percival keeps on finding, actually they were ahead of him, but they end up being skewered by some monster or falling for the temptress or something like that. So it's a point, what is life about? Well, the spiritualists come up with this idea, some of them believe in reincarnation, that we're perfecting ourselves as some being. So we go through incarnation and we go through different lifetimes and gradually we're perfecting ourselves. How true that is, I don't know. But so the question is that the way we get taught by, say, the church is to be good. Don't be evil. Be good and you'll go to heaven. But this other doctrine is that basically you have to make mistakes or even become evil to have the epiphany. Only an evil man can have the epiphany about his evil, who has gotten to know it. So this is my problem with humanism at the moment, that humanism is following this doctrine of trying to make people into perfectly good beings. Some have accused of creating moral automatons. It's, for example, in childhood. Now the nanny state is trying to protect everybody, children, we have to protect them from every sort of harm. They can never face a real challenge. Schopenhauer was was the one that was claiming that this sort of education of rotes was wrong because children need to experiment. They need to learn what the ropes are. So this is a controversy. So what Geneva's pointing out, and I won't go on any further, is a great controversy. Do we reduce people to putty? And society is a big machine and the putty's just going through the pipes nicely. Putty's better because it goes through the pipes more nicely. So we'll reduce people to putty so that they stamp out nicely. We get our mould and stamp the putty and we make them into what we want. So this is the controversy. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, it's one of those places where the difference between the modern perspective and the ancient perspective is so significant, because the modern perspective does have this tabula rasa. We're all just putty, and our job is to be passive and infantilized, and society will make of us what it needs, because society can do no wrong, of course. All history to the contrary, but apparently it always knows what's right. Whereas the ancient perspective on this is that everybody has their own ethos inside them, and their ethos is different from other people's ethos. And that ethos, their character, doesn't just contain a static picture of who they are, but it contains fountains of order that are causing new order within the person to unfold over time. They're becoming somebody new at all times. They want to become that new person, even if they don't know it themselves. And society's job, say the ancient Greeks, is to look at the person and figure out, give them opportunities to explore, try to give them some things in common, sure, but also to give them opportunities to unfold whatever it is that's growing in them, so that you don't stamp out the next Mozart, so you don't stamp out the next Martin Luther King. You want to give opportunities for people to become who they are, and you can't do that if you're just rigidly stamping everybody. If everybody's expected to be passive and infantilized and to be molded by society, you're gonna run afoul of the actual condition that human beings find themselves in as they grow and develop. I remember, I think Kenneth Smith said this about his kids. Each one of them grew up to be somebody different. And, a big part of his job was just not wrecking them and just making sure he didn't get in the way as they tried to unfold and become whoever they were becoming. It runs contrary to the modern ethos in which we're sort of taught that we're supposed to make them into little perfect versions of us. We'll have all the successes we wanted to have, but instead, what you find is, the introvert grows into becoming an adult introvert, and the extrovert grows into becoming an adult extrovert. Whatever is in them that's trying to be what it is, if you try to thwart it, all you do is frustrate. You frustrate them because they're not allowed to unfold and become who they want to be. And then you frustrate society because you can't stamp them into what you want them to be, because that's not who they are. And yet, despite decades of experience that this is the case, we want it so badly to have society just mold people as our little interchangeable units that we keep trying to do it. We keep insisting on it. We add tests to prove that everybody's exactly the way that we want to mold them. And the ones who are trying to grow into a Mozart, we declare them a failure because they didn't test well on a standardized test. This is less like a healthy society and more like a dystopia, right? I mean, this is like something out of Brave New World or 1984. Anyway, thanks for bringing that up, Stephen. It's really critical. And you're right, it flows directly from what Janine was talking about. Phil, come off mute. Tell us what's on your mind.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to apologize to Donald because I had to go to the restroom, and since I'm on a wheelchair, it takes a long time. So
Plato.
I missed most of what he was saying, so I apologize. I wonder, going back to this topic, I wonder to the degree whether understanding that we are finite, we don't like it, And so that's why almost every society has a God to help direct us. To what degree is that embedded in indoctrination? To what degree is that we are by nature herd animals, and therefore we need a leader of some sort? So that's a curious question, because I think people want answers. Whether that's because of indoctrination, we want answers instead of questions. The problem, even people who believe in question ultimately leads to an answer. Most people believe that. They do not like a question leading to another question, to another. It's an endless stream of questions that never solves the problem. And so therefore, because we are finite, we understand we are finite. Do we actually need a God that has an answer in some form? I mean, so is that based on our basic need because we actually understand that we're finite beings, that we're not infinite beings? Or is it because we've been indoctrinated, in a sense, to always want answers? If you don't have it, you want dad to tell you what it is. You don't have it. You want your teacher to tell you what it, explain to you what it is. And I think the society in general is glad to accommodate indoctrinating you into what they want you to be. And so therefore, you have to be very careful about the institutions you set up so it does at least open enough it doesn't end up in indoctrination, or at least the wrong kind of indoctrination. So the question is, I wonder whether it begins with understanding we are finite beings, and that therefore we're desperately looking for a God, whether there is a God or not, we're looking for one. Or whether because we by nature are a herd animal and we just expanded that from the tribal chiefs to a God. I mean, like, is it we are by nature, most of us, children, and we need daddy to come to our help. Help, daddy. Could you help me with my math problem? Of course, dad never studied math, so he couldn't help you. But maybe mommy could. Oh, the computer, that's even better.
The AI will help.
Yeah. So AI that. So I that's a question. I wonder if we just were ignorant of the fact that we were finite. Maybe we would be more willing to bump into doors and make mistakes. I don't know. I mean, like, understanding finiteness on the one hand is a good thing because it limits our, us. But on the other hand, it also causes this like, yeah, but we ultimately want to answer like, should I eat this mushroom? Maybe I said, no, we don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, so therefore, in a funny way, there's a contradiction within that because and society is certainly built in this situation where we end up having answers, That reminds me of the Marx Brothers, I think it's in Duck Soup or something. Groucho is running around, about the legal document, but there's a sanity clause. He's running around telling everybody there's a sanity clause at the end we have to pay attention to. And finally, he ran into Chico, and Chico says, "Come on, Groucho, there's no such thing as a sanity clause." We all know that.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
anyway, let's leave it at that. So maybe irony is a good answer. That's it, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. Well, the thing about children is sometimes they want you to tell them what to do and make it all right, but sometimes they want to do it their own selves, and they do not have patience with you doing it for them, and they go back and forth on these things. It's surprisingly early that some kids start to get impatient with you doing things for them, and they're just like, no, I do it my own self. But then adolescents who you would have thought long ago had gone down that road and did not want to have you do anything for them, you never know when suddenly they're going to want cuddles, and it's like, no, I need somebody to tell me it's going to be okay. I need somebody to give me the answer. I think your favorite word applies here to our species as a whole, which is on this question, we equivocate back and forth. We're like the cat that doesn't want to go out but doesn't want to come in, wants to sit on the doorway, and sometimes it'll take a step one way and sometimes two steps the other, and what we want is the option to go. We want access to both resources. We want both possible modes as the mood strikes us, and that's appropriate for life, right? Because some stuff we have more figured out than other stuff. Some stuff we don't know so well. I'm putting one of my favorite traditional martial arts teachers. He studied mostly under one sensei for many years, but there was he also, there was an art that he wanted to study that his sensei didn't teach, right? So he was learning Kobudo, the weapons arts from one teacher, but that guy didn't teach traditional Okinawan dance, which is another cultural form that's just as important to the Okinawans as their martial arts are, but it's not as popular worldwide. And so as a result, it's in danger of dying out sometimes. And so he wanted to go learn that, but he had to get a second sensei because his first sensei didn't teach that. And it was really important to him to tell his first sensei, I'm not dissing you, man. You're still my sensei, but you don't teach this thing. So I gotta, and the guy agreed, yeah, go learn the other thing. So he went to the other teacher, said, okay, I want to learn your traditional Okinawan dance. And the guy said, that's fine, but first I'm going to teach you some Kobudo. The guy said, what? No, I have a Kobudo teacher. I don't want to diss my Kobudo teacher by learning Kobudo from you. I already know. He says, yeah, I know you don't want to. But I know a few really rare Kobudo katas, and nobody has learned them from me, and I'm afraid they're going to die out. So if you want to learn traditional Okinawan dance, first you have to learn this 2 or 3 martial arts katas. The guy says, all right, but I'm never going to live this down. Everyone's going to think I was dissing my sensei. You see these sorts of things, right? In these communities of expertise where different people have different areas of expertise. In some areas you want to be the teacher, but in other places you want to be the student, and it all varies throughout our life. And I think this goes back to Geneva's thing about making mistakes and learning from mistakes. And sometimes we want to pass on what we've learned, or act on what we've learned, but sometimes we want to be the student again because it's the only way. And a healthy society would have to be one that supported that kind of equivocation back and forth. That nobody would be in a role where either they always teach or where they always learn. They've got to be able to shift back and forth. It's the only healthy way. And so I guess the last comments will go to Gulnaz. Come off mute and tell us what's on your mind.
With Geneva, we read really great two books, War and Peace and The Man with Qualities. I love it. I love our discussions, Geneva, really. One of the things Robert Musil says such an interesting thing in Man Without Qualities. It's not the person who commits the suicide, it's his reaction, aftermath to his own crime. No, suicide, I'm sorry, crime. I'm sorry, it's 11 p.m. here in Belgium. It's too late for me. I'm not. Anyway, so it's the person commits crime. It's not, it's his reaction, aftermath to his own crime counts. Then the judgment and the law that punishes him eventually, or something like that. I'm not sure if Geneva has got any other thought on it, but I also believe that it's not what the society says you did right or wrong, or the church, or the mosque, or religion, somebody, but it's your own reaction towards your own actions count. And how that sin, good, bad plays out, I'm not sure. To be honest, for me, would it matter? Would it matter for us so much, the good and bad? I'll come to it because earlier we talked about Napoleon and Hitler. In War and Peace, Tolstoy is a big fan of Napoleon, big fan. He loves him. The ideology of Napoleon is like he wanted equality. He wanted to remove all the kings and queens, and we have to give power, equality. You guys know the French politics based on equality, fraternity, and something else. 3.
Liberté.
Equality,
Liberté, égalité, fraternité.
Yes. So, by the way, these are very abstract notions. I'm not very abstract philosopher. I don't like abstract. I'm too realist and existentialist philosopher for that. But anyway, and then talking about Hitler, again, going back to War and Peace, there was, you guys know, before the Second World War, there was a First World War. During the First World War, War and Peace, almost like 100 years before that. Anyway, there is a build up to Second World War. The Russians, when they fought against the French, they had the Germans as an ally, but then there was something happened between that. They didn't communicate with each other well, that the Russians, like, they didn't respect the Germans at all. They're like sausage stuffing Germans, mind modeling Germans. Basically, they didn't have any respect towards the Germans. I think the whole Europe didn't have much of a respect towards Germans. That's why I think the Second World War, that Hitler coming to the power, it's our own fault that we built it up towards that moment of Second World War. Yeah, they had to put themselves back on the map. So they had to start that stupid Second World War that served nothing for anyone, least of all to the Germans. So maybe it's our own fault sometimes. It's not just he's the one or this is the one. It's usually everyone participates in evil. Everyone. No one is out of the the whole scene. So whoever is involved, whoever is affected, definitely we somehow brought it up to that point. So responsibility and accountability also we should talk about.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Gulnaz. So you're in Belgrade, did you say?
Belgium.
Belgium.
Europe.
Yes. My goodness, you and Stephen are joining from far away, time zone wise. But I'm so glad you both come. And this wraps us up for this week. Thank you, everybody. I hope you had a lovely time. I had a lovely time. And I look forward to talking with you all again next week.
Thank you, Rick.
Thanks, everybody.